Hello and welcome to episode 299 of The Crate and Crowbar. Earlier, Marsh, when I said I knew all the words I was going to say, I lied. I didn't know what day it was. What day is it, Marsh?
It is Thursday, and the computer doesn't say.
It's maybe the 17th of October?
Could be. Who knows? 17th, correct.
Good guess me. The point is, someone a long time ago, 5 or 6 years ago now, said it'd be really good if you said the date at the beginning of every episode of the podcast. And I think I have maybe spoiled the beginning of the podcast in fulfilling that obligation. But whoever you were, I hope you feel honoured and still listen. Speaking of throwbacks, it's just me, Chris Thurston, and you, Marsh Davies, tonight.
That's right, yeah. A big empty room with two very small men in it.
Yeah, do you remember when we first moved into this big empty house?
Not really, no. My memories of pretty much the last week and beyond are very, very vague at this point.
Right, well, we should talk about the last week then, because I guess they switched off Fortnite and garnered a tremendous amount of attention by doing that and switched back on again.
Yeah, pretty Incredible. Good news stories for what was a server outage, I guess.
Yeah, right. Well, it wasn't, I guess, I saw a good thread about it by someone whose name I completely forgotten because this is just top content. I couldn't be firing on any more cylinders. These are all the ones that I have. And, but it was a good thread, pointing out that they've essentially launched Fortnite Chapter 2, or Fortnite 2 Season 1, or Fortnite 2, Minecraft 2, I don't know, someone else nil. I don't know what the scoreboard is at this point.
I think Alice on Rock Paper Shotgun quipped that they should have called it Month.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Nonetheless, so it's a big update to a game I do not play, so I can't really give an informed take on that. Save that they have sort of overhauled the entire map, so a completely new island. They had previously pulled out chunks of the map and redone them and changed things about it. But I think this also comes with a lot of new features like boats and swimming and sort of presumably engine level interactive-y things that required a much bigger change than they've done previously.
Is the old game completely gone then? You can't play anything from old Fortnite?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, all the modes are intact and things, but you will do them on the new map now, I believe. Right. So they've done this before. They've made permanent changes before.
Right, yeah. But they've always been changes to an existing world, right?
Yeah, like I think I'm peripherally aware of it because you have to be, I don't play it myself, but it's like Loot Lake exploded, I think, and was a crater for a bit. All this stuff, right? Like it's live game stuff. It's actually very interesting as live game stuff goes in terms of how they handled it. I think one of the interesting things about Fortnite is it is an incredible example of a game with completely opaque lore that definitely has lore.
Does it?
But it's not about anything. Like there are no characters. It's like, it is, I think the only example I can think of storytelling completely detached from characters with agency, which you wouldn't think was possible, and you might be right. But it kind of, what it is really is like, there's a sort of logic or a series of interactions, like what will the meteor do? And what do all these rockets mean? And what was this time loop thing? And all of this that people sort of speculate about. It's basically like, if you took all of the hard sci-fi, or not even hard sci-fi, if you took all of the sort of timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly elements of Lost, and removed everything else about the show, and just had them hanging in a vacuum, that's what you get. It's just enough of those mystery things. And it's kind of interesting. It's like the J.J. Abrams mystery box reduced to the point where you just need that. You just need maybe time travel, and people will speculate about that.
Right. I always think of these kind of games as just sort of like a surface on which fan fiction can grow. You know, you can get those green walls, which are just like a permeable kind of concrete that's designed to encourage moss. That's what it is, basically. Yeah.
But I think I don't think that's an invalid use of the medium to tell a story. Cause, especially for a younger audience, they get super, super, super invested. Like, I know that we have both worked professionally in a space very adjacent to this.
Yes.
And so, it's an interesting method. And so what they did basically is take all that stuff to a conclusion, do this huge event, which is very lavishly produced, where at the end of a particular match for all the players involved, and in a cool way, also people who were in the UI, which was cool. The entire island got sucked into a black hole and the entire game was replaced with a black screen, basically. Players were expecting, and live streamers were expecting it to suddenly burst back into life. And, hooray, here's, Fortnite 2 or whatever. It just didn't happen. Just went completely dark. I did see the cool effect that if people were just idling in the main menu, even the main menu panels got sucked into the abyss, and then it got replaced with the black screen. It's just kind of cute. Yeah. Like, I like that. It's kind of fun. I saw a good thread, which I will, figure out the link for, sort of explaining that, and I think this is right. The changeover they're doing should have, almost certainly involved a pretty big infrastructure change, right? There's going to be a lot of physical server hardware that needs to be updated. There's going to be a shitload of work to do.
And that's what they were doing.
Right, yeah. And Fortnite effectively had a really, has a pretty good track record as a service, right? Like in an era where, Destiny's had some struggles recently and Warcraft had some struggles recently and all of these things. It's got a pretty, given how many players it has, the extraordinary number of players it has, and the fact that it doesn't rely on other people hosting servers or it being hived out to the community, as other popular games might be, it's kind of extraordinary that you don't hear stories about Fortnite being down, like ever.
No. Oh God. I imagine you've been in meetings where you've proposed similar solutions and they've maybe not been accepted. Wouldn't it be so good to be the guy who said, well, why don't we just suck the entire game into a black hole? And that idea not only won out, but turned out to be an amazing success.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's to their credit that not only did they sort of field it, they went with it. Like, so essentially what they could have done really is covered it by saying, hey, we've got a really exciting update planned. Here's what's coming. It's going to take us 3 or 4 days to implement it. Be patient, everybody. Here we go.
Yeah.
Right. And then done a press cycle around it or something. Like, we're going to send some influencers to a big, I don't know, roller coaster theme park and they're going to get to play on it and make videos that will cover you in the 4 days gap or whatever. Like, I'm literally thinking about how I would comms this. Like, this is now my job. Like, and that would work, I think, and it would probably be expensive and
you always think transparency is the best option.
Yeah, you do.
Maybe
like,
it isn't.
You think, be honest to people and sort of say, this is what it's going to take for us to achieve this. And so we're going to take the game off for this amount of time. And that's not what they did. What they did was just have downtime on purpose, have unexplained downtime. And not just that, but like delete every single tweet on the Fortnite account. And replace all of the avatars and things with just blank black voids. And strategically a really interesting kind of, and I am borrowing this somewhat from the thread. It's an interesting point proving thing because, candidly, like Fortnite, I think needed to do something to prove that it was essential still. Because obviously it is a phenomenon and it's going to continue to be a phenomenon just by weight of players.
Yeah.
But people, it has been a little while now.
Yeah.
And people's attention moves.
The news cycle is definitely looking for the next thing. You know, Minecraft, then Fortnite, and then you can see it sniffing its little nose.
Yes. And also, Minecraft had a huge uptick in popularity recently, in part because of players getting nostalgic for it and coming back, and leaving Fortnite to go back for a little bit or going to WoW Classic instead.
Yeah.
Right? Like it depends like how old you are as a Fortnite player. It determines which thing you get nostalgic for. Like I miss World of Warcraft or I miss Minecraft, which is basically the difference between being 30 and 20. And so this act of switching the game off and therefore getting BBC News coverage of the game being off is a real clever way of saying this is still like the most culturally relevant game because no one else gets, big press for just being offline.
I don't think it would have been as successful if they'd done anything less though. I mean, they went to the wall to sell this idea of everything being sucked into black hole. I think if they'd half-assed it in any way, it would have generated a lot of anger rather than excitement.
Right, yeah, if it was just suddenly off.
Yeah.
And it looked like incompetence. This is the thing. Like, it's funny. My instinct would always be transparency. And then, because incompetence is bad, but the flip side to incompetence is malice. And what they went for was malice, really.
Yeah.
Like, they went for, we've taken this away from you, and you can't have it.
Yeah. I think maybe if you're going for transparency, people just aren't that generous and people have been impatient. Knowing that something was coming, but because they reserved a sense of mystery.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like, if they'd done like an announcement a week before saying, hey, we've got something really big coming, preview soon, etc., they announce the update, everyone covers it because it's Fortnite, obviously, and they call it Fortnite Chapter 2, so people are going to truncate that to Fortnite 2, which will SEO extremely well. Everyone's going to cover it, but someone's going to get the op-ed out. Can Fortnite 2 save Fortnite? Within moments of that being the thing. Whereas we've killed Fortnite. Dare us to bring it back. It's like a real power move the other way. Like you can't get out in front of it and write that is Fortnite dying op-ed because they've murdered it. And that It's clever. It's really clever. Like, I mean, whether the game itself is better now, I don't know. I imagine it is. I guess so. They've got all the resources in the world to make it better, so ideally they would. But yeah, it's brassy, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I look forward to it dominating news cycles forever. Do you think it will ever be knocked off the pedestal? Do you think?
I think about this a bunch, maybe for obvious reasons, but I wonder about that because I think it will be safely on a pedestal for a very, very long time. But I think there's a distinction. Some real phenomena games, there's several kinds of like real sort of, era defining phenomena, basically. And there are the ones that there are two kinds really. There are the ones that completely sort of invent a way of playing with people or a way of playing. And there are the ones that are the first polished free option to something people already like.
Yeah.
And so in the former category, I would put World of Warcraft and Minecraft. All the crafts, basically, because World of Warcraft wasn't the first MMO, but it laid out so many templates that made them accessible to people that it was so much vastly more accessible and consumable as a thing rather than this sort of niche, grindy, very much personal investment driven kind of EverQuest thing. It was this, everyone's on the same theme park ride and you can meet up with your friends and it's relatively straightforward. It invented so many, it created a genre basically of WoW-like MMOs rather than whatever the hell people were trying to achieve before that, which I loved what people were trying to achieve before that, but no one figured it out. Minecraft does obviously Minecraft, and the examples in the other category are games like League of Legends and Fortnite, I think, and where the key is not being first or even especially original. It's about being like the most attractive, free, relatively slick version of a thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like the way you beat PUBG is be free and be PG-13. Get rid of the AK-47s, add big, I think Fortnite has AK-47s, but you know what I mean? Add nice, chunky, WoW-style rarities and all the big, flashy, kind of drop icons and big, chunky materials that you want to put in your mouth.
Silly costumes, silly dances.
Yeah, big, silly dances. And, make it free. Get it on mobile. And that's how you do a phenomena. So I think it'll be fine. But I don't know if it will I don't know what it bequeaths to the industry beyond just hoovering up a certain proportion of a certain age group of players in perpetuity.
Yeah. I wonder if I assume Epic's maneuvers with the store aren't just simply about breaking the Steam stranglehold on selling games on PC. I assume that's as much about realizing that a hit game doesn't last indefinitely and that they might as well build some other kind of business out of the success of that game.
Right. It's kind of, in a way, it's interesting because it feels like they're doing a reverse Valve.
Yeah.
In that, I think Valve have been explicit about the fact that their reasons for making Dota 2 was to expand the market for their platform, for their store in Russia and China, and to get loads more, because, those territories kind of needed, would respond to an improved version of Defense of the Ancients, rather than a sort of more aggressively monetized free-to-play thing. So that's one of the reasons Dota's so generous, because it doesn't require much of a buy-in. Valve didn't need it to require much of a buy-in, because they're making the money elsewhere.
Right.
They had the store, they just needed to bring more people to it. Epic's the other way around. They suddenly found themselves with loads of people, and they had to find somewhere else for them to go, and somewhere else for them to spend money.
Yeah.
And if they can't make loads of games themselves, they should sell everyone else's. Right? Like it follows, but it's kind of interesting that, I wonder at what point they won't need Fortnite. I suspect they always will.
I don't know. Come back in a year or 2 years and we'll see. Yeah. I suspect their marketplace will be very successful eventually. If it isn't already, I'm sure it's making lots of money, but I think a lot of the objections to different marketplaces will just evaporate over the course of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, inevitably, all it takes is enough people. All it takes is enough sunk cost to form a fallacy.
Indeed.
And that's games. Would you like to talk about my vast sunk cost fallacy?
I would love to talk about your
Can we talk about Destiny?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I've ruined my entire life.
Oh dear.
And I hate to break this to everyone on the podcast. I've been away for a couple of weeks. I was traveling. And as I listened to the episode 2 episodes ago, I think when Shadowkeep had just launched and Destiny had just, been reborn as a free game on Steam and so on. So I appreciate that some of this has been discussed on the pod, but the things they've done go a bit further than that. So in addition to, everyone who had a battle.net version of Destiny moving over to the Steam version, it's now fully cross-play compatible. So it's cross-compatible with PS4 and Xbox, etc. If you had multiple accounts previously, you have to pick which one you consider to be the official one. You can have the others, but that one is the one that gets cross-play. Right. I only had one. I was playing on PS4, and I had been playing on PS4 for years. So I hadn't played Destiny on PC because that sunk cost. Mm-hmm. There it is. But also, your attachment to a particular character and playing it for years. And so I went from Destiny, something I play on the couch, and then many months of just not doing that, and maybe a 9-month break from the game, a game that I played pretty religiously since it came out. And but then suddenly I found myself able to play it on the couch in my new house, or go upstairs to my office and play it on my PC, where it alt-tabs beautifully, which makes it the kind of perfect, just 5 minutes kind of, I'm going to play a Crucible match kind of thing.
Very quick menus, I hear. Actually, I've experienced it. But
they're nice. It also runs on my laptop.
Does it?
Really well. Yeah. So that meant I could take it with me to Canada. And so during slow moments, because we were at Shucks, the Shut Up and Sit Down convention, and during some quiet moments in the hotel room, or if I was feeling knackered, I could just stick Destiny on and play Destiny on the hotel Wi-Fi because of its bizarrely great netcode that seems to mean it works on anything. And this means I can play it almost anywhere. And so it's become this sort of almost, it's a testament to Disco Elysium, which we'll get to, that something else has pulled me away from it. Because it used to be okay, this is the game I step up from my desk to go and do. And now it's I'm in the mood for a PC game. How about Destiny? No, I think I'll go downstairs. This actually happened. I was upstairs, my new office is in the loft. I was in the loft and I was it was in the evening, I was going to sit down to play a game, and I was no, I've been up here all day for work. I'm not just going to sit up here. And I was literally loading Destiny, and then closed Destiny, walked downstairs, sat in the living room, and loaded Destiny. And any point in the midway, I could have picked up my laptop and just sat on the floor and played Destiny there.
Oh no.
So yeah, it's over for me now. It really is. But I have been, that game has gone through so many cycles of, this is not quite working, and they fixed it again. But, it feels like it's in a really good spot now. Free to play seems to work for it. And I know you've been playing it, Marsh, so I'll be curious to see what you've been making of it. But I found myself sort of, really appreciating, just how much expertise has gone into kind of furnishing the sort of experience that it is. And I think it's easy to be a bit cynical about sort of bottomless grind kind of hobby games. And there's a bunch of these around, right? This is Warcraft or Warframe or anything like that. And maybe this is a sort of line in the sand for me. I think this is a genre, and I don't think it's invalid in and of itself. And I think there is an art to creating them. And I think that Destiny is as close as it gets to kind of having sort of fair and interesting solutions to a lot of the things that rise up out of that sort of set of circumstances. The fact that, you've got this, they have replaced what were the kind of chance-based or kind of repetitive grinds of the first game with just so many quests to do that you have to pick what you're going to focus on. But they found ways of, for example, taking, the idea of a quest where you have to kill X with X or get this many pulse rifle kills or whatever. And using that as a way of both, you set your own goals, particularly in the end game, and you just go and pursue that goal. Yeah. Within, shopping lists within shopping lists within shopping lists. But also, in a meaningful way, making a game out of essentially the project management of it. I think Alex mentioned on the podcast 2 episodes ago that he doesn't feel like he was playing it particularly efficiently. And I think the real key to the joy of Destiny is understanding that efficiency is one of the things that you're actually pursuing. It's not about min-maxing it. It's if you get if you're working on a quest that requires you to get a certain amount of submachine gun kills, and you're also working on one that requires arc weapon kills, it's going into your vault of weapons and going, well, can I get an arc submachine gun? And then can I make a build around that, which is going to let me progress in this kind of quest faster? And what do I understand about, or maybe I need to kill a particular kind of enemy. What do I understand enough about the world, or am I likely to find them in sufficient numbers to do this quickly? And that rewards you for your understanding of your own loadout, your ability to create new loadouts, to experiment with how deep the weapon customization and build customization goes, your not understanding of the world, and what kind of activities are available that will get you those sorts of points faster. And I really find that rewarding. I think part of me just loves management, really, and managing things in games. And I think the reason it's such a success for me now particularly is it's a series of, I mean, ultimately pointless tasks, but in video games, isn't it? Like, a series of ultimately pointless tasks that you can plan in a really satisfying way. You can like, I'm going to build it, in Diablo, you wear the best equipment you've got. This is like taking that that principle and saying like, well, try wearing something different to do this. And then, you experiment with a different build for a bit. Like they do this in PvP, they do this in, PvE stuff. And then the individual unit of interaction with the world, which has been mentioned, I think, plenty, but like everything feels so good and all the combat feels so nice and it all reacts so dynamically and everything feels great that it's fun for me on both a micro and a macro level, if that makes sense. Right. It has almost like a clicker game's macro level planning, but instead of clicking, it's bungee shooting, which I far prefer. It's a form of clicking. You click on alien ghost man head, it pop, you go,
yeah.
That's immensely satisfying to me. I don't know if that was a bit too sudish, but it's like that space, I think, is like, that is like sort of almost my defensive grind in a way, that it is this sort of, it's actually a game in itself. And one thing they've done is really successful. It gives you so many different pathways to follow that you can just, and if you're overwhelmed by that, I can understand it, but there's also part of it, it's just like, it's satisfying to polish it off. I don't know how you've been feeling about it, or what your experience of it has been.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I hadn't really considered it in those terms, but now that you've said it, that jives a lot with what I've been experiencing. Although I don't think I'm at a stage where I can enjoy it in the way you do. I think I'm missing. So it feels like you're enjoying like the tactical level of stuff and you're enjoying the meta level of stuff. But really where I get my motivation as a player is from the strategic level of stuff, which I don't feel is really expressed that well by Destiny. And I can totally get sucked into the kind of meta level stuff, and I can get and I obviously I enjoy the moment to moment combat. But the way that the game is structured for newbies at the moment is just so overwhelming that you can't really perceive the ways in which you could pursue that efficiency in a gratifying way. And there's no way you could pursue the narrative level kind of enticements, let's say. I mean, it's completely confusing. There's there is some sort of onboarding, but then it just plonks you in a world with a bunch of different things that contradict exactly what it's just been telling you to do. And there's just a tidal wave of bullshit turns that completely douse you. I am enjoying it. I do like tootling around in it, because, bungee combat feels just always really fucking good. They've nailed it. But I play it and I feel like, this would be so much better if it was in a linear narrative experience. Right. Which is a weird thing for me to kind of yearn for, I think. But,
it's funny that
I didn't realize it was the structural narrative of Halo games that were the things that I enjoyed about it. I wouldn't have ever said that those were the things I loved about Halo, but it turns out I do miss that.
Yeah, right. I think Destiny has achieved that on one bit by bit, but it's like,
but I think you needed to be there with the chronology as it progressed.
Yeah, like playing every new campaign as it comes out, you follow along and things build, and I think it's interesting. Like there's a moment, like there's some real classic Bungie in Shadowkeep, which hasn't sort of been mentioned, but like it's sort of the real classic Bungie thing is to turn a corner or crawl out of a crashed dropship and go, insert geometric object here insert unlikely space place for said geometric object. For example, a huge ring with mountains on it in space. That's weird. Or, a big ball in the sky over the last city. And Shadowkeep it actually stops you from jumping, stops you from running, and makes you lower your weapons for a moment to appreciate that big triangle on the moon. And if you've been following Destiny since the very beginning, this is fucking mind blowing. And like, it's worth it for we were watching the hardcore Destiny streamers, particularly the lore streamers who've been doing this for years, turning that corner and going like, I can't believe they've done this. They've finally done it. Oh my God. Like tears streaming down their eyes at this revelation and what it means. And for everyone else, it's like, lovely skybox triangle, on with the game.
Well, this is the problem. I think they've done themselves a disservice through overstimulation, because every skybox looks fucking amazing. I don't don't know what's meant to be important or not. I just walk out in the first level. I'm just, my mind is blown.
Yeah, they did this. They keep doing it, and they're all good at it. And it's in testament to them that they keep managing to pull it off. Like when Destiny 2 came out, they hadn't really revealed what the raid would be. The raid usually arrives about 3 weeks after the game launches.
Right.
Like to basically let players get to the point where they could even do it. Mm-hmm. And when the raid arrived for Destiny 2, it took the form of, it's the Leviathan, which is basically this huge sort of planet-chewing, massive space worm ship that is the palace of a extremely corpulent, sort of hedonism bot style space emperor who just wants to invite you to his far too big spaceship to shoot things for his amusement, basically. Mm-hmm. But it shows up in orbit around one of the planets, and it's there on the mission selector, the planetary mission selector where it is. But that night when they added it to the game, they also added it to the skybox for that zone. So, and it's absolutely vast. And if you get the sort of ocean willies from, vast cosmic objects, they just added this thing, and it's almost a horror reveal as you pan up and you realize that the reason part of the stars are obscured is because there's something moon-sized, and it's just a mouth like hovering next to the planet. And they just did this sort of on the sly overnight with the skybox update. And I love stuff like that because it is very sort of exciting. But that's the thing. You're sort of there for the journey. So the pressure on a new player now is like, accept that you've, just take the wave of FOMO, basically, like retroactive FOMO, accept it, chew through it, get to the current power cap or whatever, accept that sometimes you're going to get mission descriptions that are in the past.
Yes.
And then nothing's going to make sense. And then when the next expansion comes out, you'll be there with everyone else and you'll be fine. You know what I mean? It's and that's a really tough ask, I think, particularly as they continue to move things forward, particularly because I really heavily suspect that the next thing will be Destiny 3.
Right.
This really feels like the last expansion for Destiny 1 wasn't particularly successful. This is much better, but it feels quite similar in that it feels like a sort of setting out of stalls ahead of a bigger set of changes. I think that would be my suspicion. I think that this time next year, we'll be looking at Destiny 3 because that would also fit the timeline.
I assume this was a revitalization of Destiny 2 that was meant to keep them ticking along for much longer than for that.
They always do a big thing in September.
Oh, okay.
And for Destiny 1, it was, first year, massive expansion, second year, smaller expansion, and then the year after that was Destiny 2. And the exact same pattern has been followed with Destiny 2. So maybe the free-to-play thing will change that. And maybe they don't need to blow it up again because there were various mechanical reasons and multi-platform reasons why they need to blow up Destiny and redo it. Because Destiny 1 was locked to the previous generation of consoles as well. Everything they did had to work on 360.
Right.
So they kind of had to blow the world up and redo it in order to meaningfully move things forward. So maybe they don't need to do a 3, but I get the feeling that something of that scale is probably coming, partly because of stuff they're doing with the story as well. But yeah. There's two things. One thing is, I think if you're interested in the sort of, I don't know if this is of interest to you at all, but I think it doesn't get mentioned enough. Destiny's a really very capable competitive shooter.
Yes, I haven't played the PvP yet. Yeah. I really want to, because I love playing Halo PvP, right. And so are there the same modes as Halo?
There are some. It's mostly different, but there are tons. So, and there's some Spirit of Halo type things. So there are sort of rotating silly mode playlists. Like everyone's jumping around with one of those. Have you had a Scorch Cannon yet? Which is like a rocket launcher that puts you in third person when you're carrying it.
Nope.
They occur in like open world sort of events and stuff. You might get given them for a particular mission or to shoot a tank or something. There was a multiplayer mode last week which was just bounding around with them trying to shoot people, it's a big slow projectile weapon, so it's almost tribes-like trying to hit people with them.
Right.
'Cause everyone's so vertically mobile in Destiny that standing on the floor is a death sentence. And it's very throwaway, but you get stuff like that. And then you have the core competitive modes, of which there are loads.
Is there a small team mode?
Yeah.
Team deathmatch, right? Because that's
this actually, so most of it boils down to variants on team deathmatch. They've experimented with sort of, there's two sort of interesting, they've experimented with variants on sort of CTF style things in the past. But I feel like, honestly, I personally think that this is their mode crafted. It's kind of most honed in terms of how to make team deathmatch interesting. So the core one is control, where there are 3 control points on a map. And when you kill a member of the enemy team, the amount of points you get is equal to, it's a minimum of 1, but otherwise it is equal to the number of points your team holds. Which is real elegant because it means that there is an advantage. You're never out of generating points, but there's obviously an advantage to territory control, which means that it's not just sort of a random melee. Things naturally ebb and flow. But also there's logic in that if one team captures all 3 points, it's very likely that the spawns get scrambled. So when people respawn, it actually creates quite a lot of chaos. So there's sort of a tactical or strategic thing about trying to hold 2 points, but not 3. Unless you think you're going to lose one, in which case you try and cap the other one, that can cause it to happen anyway. Like, it's really interesting. The mode that is running this week, which is time limited, just for this week, is a variant on that where when all 3 nodes get captured, they all get locked, so nothing can change. And, the team that has done that is encouraged to basically hunt the other team for maximum points, but then all 3 nodes get reset. So everyone goes back to nothing afterwards. And that's kind of interesting because it creates this sort of tight territory control followed by almost like the kind of asymmetrical, like hide and seek. Like it's basically called the hunt, basically. When the hunt begins and all 3 points have been captured, if you're being hunted, it kind of makes sense to try and hide or to avoid fighting.
Right.
Or if you're feeling cocky, try and kill the enemy team so they're stuck on their respawn timer when they could be running around trying to hoover up points. Like those, I love stuff like that. Those little kind of micro decisions that you can plan around either on your own or with a team, and it's good.
I did play a sort of co-op/competitive mode.
Gambit,
yes. So 2 teams playing their own cooperative games, basically. But the more success you have in your cooperative game means that you can send things over to the other player's cooperative game and
Puzzle Bobble.
Yeah, Puzzle Bobble, exactly, yes.
Puzzle Bobble. Yes, sort of, high stakes puzzle bobble. Like, and that has Gambit has some cool mechanics in it, like, at thresholds as you fill this bank, you're basically filling a bank full of motes of darkness that you get from killing space baddies. You put them in a bank, and then when the bank fills up, you spawn a boss. If you kill the boss, you win, basically. But as you reach certain thresholds, a portal opens, which allows you to invade the other team's game as a Dark Souls style invader, and then run around trying to kill them or disrupt their plan. You get maybe 30 seconds in their territory to try and do something. That is its own thing. It's super cool. There's a genuine meta game that's nothing to do with gear levels or anything like that, and it's just to do with how you approach, how you strategize around timings, and there's like, you can see at any given time how many motes of light the enemy team is holding that they haven't banked yet. So that is a good time to invade. But if you do it right after they, you know what I mean? So there's a lot, I don't know, I maybe don't need to go into all the granular details, but that stuff's pretty cool to me. Like, I like
yeah, it's a nice piece of game design.
Yeah, there's a lot of it. And then there's, the sort of competitive deathmatch modes, which are sort of 3v3, very tight, limited lives team deathmatch, which again have a completely different feel and cadence, because suddenly you can't. Destiny is a game that works both as a sort of fairly strategic peeking around corners, quite lethal shooter, and as a running at each other with magic, space magic sort of powers thing, which is one of the reasons it's great. Trying to think of anything else I wanted to mention about it that I think is interesting. One thing I thought was interesting, bouncing off the discussion that you guys had about the storytelling, is I've been thinking about this a bunch recently, because I think more games are like this than are not, in a way, where they end up as this big sandbox full of story that no one is ever going to really experience in the right order, unless you really, really, really hold people's hands and drag them through it. And I completely get where you're coming from when it's, God, I wish, just give me a Halo, please. Like, tell me a story. But what's interesting about it is I think the lesson they have learned is, I really like Destiny's world building, and I think they have a lot of smart writers. I think the writing is of inconsistent quality, but there's some really lovely stuff buried in there, and some of the side fiction and descriptions on things are genuinely nice. And I think unlike a lot of games, they're happy to be playful with form, which a lot of people aren't. So even if you go like, exotic weapon descriptions, for example.
Yeah.
They each have a big page of text basically associated with them. Sometimes you're going to get an email or emails between, characters or something. Sometimes you're going to get a chat log that is anonymous and you kind of can imply who it is. Sometimes you'll get a gothic story. Sometimes you'll get a poem. Like, it really is sort of very playful with it and, quite evocative, and they're very careful to like match certain moods of writing to certain areas of the fiction and the game more broadly. So you're much more likely to get a certain kind of almost genre of fiction from a certain part of the story than another, which helps you stitch it together in your mind, but also gives it quite a broad feel. Like, all of this season is very Vex heavy. The Vex are time traveling robots, and that gets into very, if you dig down into that leads you to a very sort of, sort of hard sci-fi sort of real rigors of simulation theory and time travel and AI stuff. I think the thing that stuff was always there. The mistake they made with Destiny 1 was that was all there was.
Yeah.
And I think what they've learned is and I think the interesting thing I put it is, I think if people are frustrated of games trying to be movies, what games like Destiny are doing should stand out as, at least in a mainstream sense, an interesting way of not doing that, which is you tell your movie style Hollywood story through your 6-hour campaign, right? Between missions, you get some cutscenes, you get some audio bits. It's funnier, it's lighter. And like, so at its sort of top level, as it will be experienced by most people, Destiny is space fantasy, right? Big nouns, big pyramids, big circles, big space ghosts, go shoot them. The action is sort of fairly cinematic and so on. It doesn't really rely on cinematics too much, but it's, it's at that level. But then as you dig down, it becomes far more kind of literary and about kind of this big library of stories that's there to kind of be uncovered as you perform activities and you build out your tome of lore, but also your own understanding of the world. And I think that's a smart way of handling it because it means it's fundamentally sort of interactive at every level. It becomes something that people can kind of breeze through, but the actual, it's kind of like a world Bible will be produced when people make a film or a TV show, but you won't see it. And this kind of MMO, I think when they're successful, make a game out of reassembling that lore Bible in your own brain, basically. I can understand people would hate doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the Dark Souls thing.
It is, yeah.
Dispersed storytelling. Has the wider lore explained why the robot lady that I play has breasts? Does she, like, wean a Roomba at any point?
I guess not. So the robots are people who died and became robots.
Oh, okay.
So that's the number. So some characters have like a number after their name, which is how many times. So it's like, obviously as the characters in Destiny, you're immortal. The notion is you were a robot before you were regenerated by the little ghost. And it was a sort of previous way of like consciousness implantation. So people would have their consciousness implanted in a humanoid robot body. I
did not expect a serious answer to this.
Yeah, of course, you asked me. So I guess if your robot lady has breasts, it's because she wanted a robot body that somewhat reflected her
nostalgic,
her original form. Yeah, exactly.
I understand that. Yes.
Yeah, it's very understandable. Why some of them have horns? That's a bigger question. Yeah. No, it's good. I like it. I like how everything sounds and looks. It's crunchy.
So Disco Elysium.
Yeah, let's talk about Disco Elysium. Boy.
I mean, there is something to be said about, in the transition between those two narrative modes, right? I mean.
Right. Yeah, I think they are opposite things in almost every possible way, which is itself a kind of segue. Yeah, they're completely different. And I think, oh God, I don't even know what angle to attack Disco Elysium from. I can't really help with this. But like, it's, it's like Destiny is like, we're going to be the gamiest game that's ever gamed and try and do this in the fairest, nicest, broadest, prettiest way we can. But it's 100% game as endless occupation of your brain at a certain level without ever challenging anything above one of the first two characters you meet in Disco Elysium, basically.
Disco Elysium feels like somebody woke up from a mad dream and then spent the next decade trying to exactly recreate it.
Right, yes.
I do like it a lot.
I like it a lot too.
In Disco Elysium, you play a cop. Or at least there is some evidence that at some point in the recent past, you were a cop. However, much of that evidence has been obliterated during a 3-day boozing binge, which has also caused you to lose your entire memory and recollection of where you are or what you're doing. But it does seem, which is quite a convenient premise for an RPG protagonist. Amnesia protagonists are a sort of staple of the genre. But in this case, they've really committed to it. You are, a lot of the game is about recovering from a terrible, terrible period in your life.
Yeah.
And with how you react to that, whether you apologize for that, whether you break down further, whether you, carry on riding that dragon, are all options to you. Yeah,
it's not just, and that's the thing, like, it kind of is a detective game, but it's really detective fiction and games as a framework for essentially a series of sort of both questionnaires for you and also sort of acts of, I think, sort of almost showy acts of, sort of, I'm trying to right way to phrase this. It's like it performs like every kind of existential crisis you can imagine in every direction you want to encounter it. And that's really what it's there for, right? Like it is asking, it's like a sample platter of ways in which to, struggle to be alive.
Yeah.
Like, and you are technically,
a lot of that is very, very funny, but it's also, it's incredibly sensitively done. Like I don't, there is a lot of truth in nearly everything that it does, even when it's sending itself up. It feels more like somebody able to laugh at themselves rather than at any point exploiting or laughing at the crises that your character has undergone.
Right. And I think this is really crucial. Like, and I feel like, so I almost, part of me wants to go deeper and part of me wants to go back and sort of explain kind of how you interact with it, but we can get to that. Like, it could be unbearable, what it's trying. Because, and I think I'll be interested, obviously it's got really, really lavish praise I've seen, but I'd be interested to see whether that continues and, who object to it or not. Because I think there are some, things about it that are both extremely laudable and put it in, territory where it's really easy to slip up. So, you are an amnesiac RPG protagonist waking up from this 3-day bender, but you are also a very specific character. It does character creation, but in its own way. And that specific character is a sort of middle-aged, highly kind of increasingly decrepit white man. And one of the most important things it does, I think, is that is not nothing. You are not a blank slate.
No.
You are that at least. And that that imposes tons of the things that go on inside you. We talked about it on the podcast before, but you're in constant conversation with your own impulses and your own kind of internal processes.
It's, I know we talked about it before and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. But, now having played it, I really think it is brilliant.
Yeah.
Like all the skills that you would normally have in an RPG are actually essentially characters that you can have dialogue with. And they have dialogue with each other. So depending on what points you've put into certain skills, you might be in conversation. You might, as a player, want something from another character and have failed to get it so far. And one of your skills will be like, you've got to grovel, man. Just get down on your fucking knees and blab like a fucking baby. And then one of your other skills will pass a skill check and say, no, show some fucking self-respect. Yeah. And that will change the conversation options that are then available to you. And that's a really interesting,
it's extraordinary.
Yeah, it speaks a lot to, I think, how consciousness works, which is fundamentally quite very interesting.
It is. And one thing I love about it is, I feel we're going to go in lots of different directions with this, but
yeah,
no, it's so good. Like, I love that, its skills aren't just things like, there are things like logic and physical dexterity and things, but there are sort of things that are resonant ideas that, it has its own sort of taxonomy of the consciousness. So my signature skill is shivers, which is a really interesting one, which is,
sense of a city or something.
Your sense of a city. So occasionally you're overcome by a sense of just how cities are and this can take the form of, your shivers will show up to describe the scene you're in from a much greater distance. Cause, it's like two men standing in the headlights of a car looking at something. What does that feel like? And I personally resonate a lot with cities and urban environments and things. And I like them and I find them so compelling. So I sort of picked it because I was like, this is kind of interesting. Like, and all of these sensitivities, give you, bonuses to skill checks and things like that in a role-playing sense. But each of them are sort of good and bad. If you're, too sensitive, you're overcome by these sorts of senses of the world at the expense of more immediate things.
Well, this is the brilliant thing about the system, because it allows the player to have, or the character to have motivations which are not only singular. Sorry, they aren't singular at all. There's a multiplicity of motivations, all conflicting, and the player doesn't necessarily get to choose which ones they prefer all the time.
Right.
Everything is in conflict. This character is conflicted, and that is expressed exactly through the way that these different things dialogue with each other. I picked empathy as my main skill, which turns the game almost into a third person narration, because you get to hear that essentially the thoughts of other characters a great deal more than you would otherwise.
I've got quite high empathy, so I have the same thing. Yeah,
but which is really nice. And there's an amazing piece of writing where you have a clipboard and you've only got a shitty blunt pencil, and you see that your colleague has two beautiful pens, and you can ask him for one, and he's just really reticent to give you one. He's a quite fastidious character. He doesn't want to give you this pen. And there's this just a beautiful exchange where you can opt to change your mind and say, don't worry about it. And he won't react at all during this. He sort of freezes up and hopes that the danger to his pens just disappears somehow. And then it's not mentioned again, but then there's a little bit of empathy describing how, the danger is past, and he physically relaxes without acknowledging it.
I think I have a pen. I had a pen at that point. Oh. It was a big green pen with a lovely monkey on top. And like, there's a good, I think this is a description with Kim, your partner, in the same scene, which I think is something like, he's sort of glad that you're getting to work, but it's like a shit covered clipboard and a big pen with a big monkey on the top. And it's like, you see like, again, I had high empathy. So you see that sort of, you're empathetic enough to realize that he is actually seeing past how ridiculous this is to being slightly pleased. Like, it's kind of like, it's sort of, it's absolutely incredibly intricate in that way.
Very, very granular game. Like, I don't know how long you've been playing. I think I've been playing 8-9 hours. And I haven't finished the first day, in inverted commas, of the game yet.
Yeah, man. I think I'm maybe 4 or 5 and I'm towards the end of the first day.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, I see. Speed demon, huh?
Yeah. Speed run. Any percent maximum existential crisis. I think, I like it sort of evocative. I like the sense of your sensitivities as faults and as, as benefits. I love the way that translates, and this is something I want to talk about. I love the way that translates to your own sort of, political alignment. I don't know if you've had this much.
This is something I wanted to talk to you about because, I feel like the game treads quite a dangerous path, I think, because it gives you quite a broad spectrum of political views that you can express. And the thing, okay, so just to wind back a tiny bit, one of the reasons that this game is extraordinary, and I think partly due to its skill, dialogue, internal dialogue system, is that not really many RPGs allow you to dissemble at all. Like, it's often, this is the thing that happens a lot in RPGs. A character will ask you to do something and you'll be like, sure, I'll do that. And it'll just like, quest accepted. And suddenly you'll have to do it because the game doesn't imagine that the player could speak with any kind of dual motivation or, a secondary purpose or lie. Lying is quite difficult unless it comes up with like, lie in brackets, it just doesn't happen. Whereas this game, it seems like so many of the answers that you can possibly give are ironic or they're playful or they're a sign of deep insanity,
Yeah.
And it's sophisticated enough that it can actually articulate things at that level without being jarring or without breaking consistency. But so to go back to what you're saying when I just interrupted and co-opted it, there are options that you can be extremely sexist. You can agree with other people's sexist views. You can, be quite racist. You can completely, take on, the race supremacy's views of another character. Whether you do that just to get something out of them or not is sort of up to the player. And obviously you are also playing a character. So at one level, I think, Martin of 5 years ago maybe would have played this game and been like, that's absolutely fine. It's a piece of art. These views can be expressed in the world. You're playing a character. There are many nuances to who you are as a person and who you are as a player, whether that maps perfectly onto the things being said. You're not necessarily a bad racist person if you say these lines of dialogue in a video game. But in the current moment, it worries me that some players, the deplorables, we might call them, don't have the sophistication to recognize this as a piece of art and will just see it as validation of their own fucking horror person that they are.
Right. And this is the issue with all stories like this, right? Joker just came out.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Like there will always be a part, like this is like the disclaimer that should come with if it worked this way. Like when you begin to type, your novel or movie or game about a sort of a disaffected sort of white man who lives in a society.
Yeah.
Who doesn't know where he fits in the society. Clippy should pop up. And he should say, hey, 80% of your fans are going to wildly misunderstand this. And that is never going to go away. Are you sure you'd like to continue?
Yeah.
And so
I don't think it's a moral crime for you to... I don't think Joker was a moral crime for Todd Phillips to create.
No.
But at the same time, you have to believe that there are going to be people out there who will not understand it. And I wouldn't have necessarily believed that 5 years ago. But now we have people who, happily describe themselves as involuntary celibates and think that's a rallying call,
Fight Club was the canary in this coal mine, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But the reason I think Disco Elysium is really interesting, so that is one issue with Disco Elysium, I think, is that it acts as this sort of, I did the interview with Robert Kurvitz that's on our YouTube channel, and I would recommend not listening to that because he does talk about what the game's actually about. But I can give a sort of, sense of it, which is that it is sort of about, shaping this person, right? This person has emerged from this sort of primordial booze soup, and, you have a chance to shape them and, deciding what kind of person you want to be. And part of its cynicism, which is also part of its humor, is that every direction you choose to go in has hypocrisies and pitfalls and holes. And in its best moments, those hypocrisies and pitfalls and the humor come from the fact that ultimately the power you have to shape who you are post a disaster like this is actually a tremendous privilege, right? Like, if you were going to wake up with no memory of who you are and no real sense of, apart from despair and pain, but you happen to be sort of like, white male, a policeman, and the people, the bar you've wrecked in your bender will still let you sleep there because they don't want to chase you around for the bill. You've won a few lotteries, even if you feel like you're at the bottom.
Yeah.
And
there are moments where your character recognizes that as well.
There are. That's the thing. That's what I'm saying are its best moments, where it actually engages with the fact that this is not the story of someone coming up from the bottom. This is someone coming up from a position.
Yeah.
And trying to deal with that position. I think one of its weaknesses, in a sense, is that when we get these sorts of stories, they always do tend to be about the same sort of person in some ways, right? I don't know why that is necessarily. But there is a sort of, and I think, I personally, I think this is a really sensitively written example of its kind, necessarily. Like, if you would compare it to, it doesn't, you kind of name yourself at the beginning, but you're not a hero. You're definitely not a heroic figure. And your pursuit of things, if you choose to go down, you follow your electrochemistry and chase sort of booze and drugs and sex and things. It doesn't put those things on a pedestal. Like, it doesn't go in the sort of, Bret Easton Ellis direction with this. Yeah. Or even the Hunter S. Thompson direction with this, which it could go in. Like, it doesn't glorify self-destruction. No. It's just, but self-destruction is absolutely everywhere. Like, some of my favorite moments in it has been, so I've been playing it, I sort of figured, I didn't really know how to approach it, so I just thought, well, I'm trying to kind of embody myself in this because I'm a white man. So I'm just going to sort of, and it's been nice because it's been like being bullied by it. It's been good because at its best moments, it can really expose the weaknesses in your thinking. Like, I have tended to express that I'm not know if I'm entirely comfortable being a cop. Yeah. Particularly given it's important to note that in its fiction, being a detective means something very different than it would connotate in our society. Yeah. For reasons that are quite complicated, but yeah. They're not particularly comfortable being a cop, but ultimately I don't want to push people or lie about things. I don't use my authority too strongly, but ultimately kind of want to be kind of, ultimately sort of respectful and back off and from conflict and things like that. And eventually I think it was my empathy cropped up. I don't know if this has happened to you, and invited me to go on a journey with it to an inner territory that I can't remember what it's called, and I'm going to guess, but it's the kingdom of something. But it's like, it's not the kingdom of tomorrow, but it's something like the kingdom of tomorrow. And the idea is that your political view is the very slow revolutionary. You would love things to be better, but you understand that real change takes place very, 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 very slowly. And so you will live forever in the kind of moral high ground, the moralist location, of the kingdom of next time, basically. You will continue to make small, correct moral decisions, but no big choices that will actually meaningfully change things. And you can have this argument with yourself where you're like, well, does that just mean that I support the status quo? And it's like, effectively, yes, but you know that's not the case. Or is it?
Well, weirdly, I mean, even though I thought I was playing similarly, I was accused of being a communist by by some part of my id. And I went back and forth, well, I don't really want to be a full-blown communist. But then I thought, what would be more fun? I might as well. And they're like, great, let's get those people into gulags then. I was like, wait, what? The part of my brain was like, too late now.
So I feel like all of this stuff floats above like an underlying current of like nihilism, which if it was to dip into completely, it would weaken it.
Yeah, this is the thing I would criticize it for is, it's a problem with these kind of fictions. It's a problem with Joker for sure, but it's also a problem with RPGs, which stem from Deus Ex onwards, where they provide you with these different choices, but they're desperate to put a sting in the tail of all of them, and make them roughly morally equivalent by doing so. And I think this game is more nuanced than that. I mean, it's set in a fictional mid-20th century world where there are very, very specific political connotations to everything. But that being said, it does seem to make sure that nothing is an outright good. And I feel like developers or filmmakers, this is very true of Joker as well, and so, feel like they're being even-handed when they do things like, well, the rich are pretty terrible, but, you know, the poor are basically a raging mob who will tear each other to shreds at the merest sign of, you know, and they think that's even, but it's actually a very conservative viewpoint, because the only way you can go after you dismiss everybody else's motivations as being impure is into yourself. And the self is essentially the idol of the conservative. And I find that slightly noxious. And I wish there was more opportunity for lightness in the kind of choices that you're making, or at least some kind of noblesse, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting that, because I think one of the ways that it manages to be effective is that it is hard to help people, which is something that it does as an RPG that is, I think, almost a little bit nobler in and of itself than other RPGs. It acknowledges, like, very early on you meet a real shitty kid. Just a real shitty kid. I would say one of its few flaws, I think, is the voice acting's really inconsistent. And
did you not like his Scouse accent?
No, I do actually. He's one of the more effective ones, in a sense. It's not an amazing Scouse accent, I don't think, but it's like, but it is in the territory like, oh, for fuck's sake. And it actually, like, there are some moments with that are genuinely uncomfortable, even when you're trying to do the right thing. Like, particularly if you fail the empathy check to try and just figure out what's wrong with him, like, you know, whether he's having trouble at home or anything like that. In a very adult, like, I just, you know, I refuse to be bullied by a kid who's hurling abuse at me, but I do care enough to want to try and figure something out. And he starts screaming at you that, oh, you're a paedophile and you've come to get him. And he starts to back away, but in a theatrical way. And he's using every trick to make you uncomfortable and to try and assert dominance over you. And you have to hold back your desire to hit him, which comes up, and you suppress it, and then he calls you on it because he figures it out. And you can say, no, I didn't think that, or yes, I did, or well, how do you know that I felt that way? And if you say that, he says something like adults always do. And it's like, you get these little shades of what's actually happening, but in a situation where it becomes profoundly uncomfortable to try and do what in any other RPG would be the paragon thing. Of like, reach out to the shitty goblin or whatever. Like, that it doesn't work. And it's sort of imperfect, and you kind of, you know, bimble on from it. That, I think, is very effective. I do think it's got an interesting thing in that, you know, I came up with the thing of like, you know, do you consider yourself an individualist or not? And one interesting thing is like, it encodes a certain individualism because, one, you're, you know, creating this character, and because you're interior, you know, you equip thoughts. You know, a big part of your inventory is what thoughts you're having. And
having over a very long period of time, just these things ticking along in the background.
Right. And maybe this comes back around to being clever, but like, you cannot play this game and not be somewhat obsessed with your interiority. And I would argue that stands slightly opposed to a kind of purely kind of an ideologically pure collectivism. But that is kind of the problem in life. And so that is in itself something. I think the thing about it is, it's funny how the game feels, I think it feels absolutely phenomenally crafted and beautifully made. And I think it is, but the question I would ask you is, do you feel like it's radical? Because, and not in a cool skateboard trick kind of sense, because I think the radical version of this game would be where you were answering these questions, but it wasn't teaching you about what it's like to be a middle-aged man who is a police officer who's had a huge bender, but it was teaching you what it was like to be a woman in that society or a person of color in that society. Right. To be the victim of the racism you see rather than, have the privilege of neutrality or the privilege of a quote unquote blank slate. Like that feels like the radical version of this game, right? Where you're not physically imposing and therefore you don't have to fear for your safety.
Well, I used physicality as my dump stat, so I actually had a heart attack in the first scene trying to pick up my necktie, and I had to restart.
Oh no, did you die?
Yeah, full up fucking died. I also kicked a furnace later on and died. But you can save some of these things, thankfully. So
yeah, and there are a few instances I think where it wanders, because it's set in as you say, like a fictionalized world, but one where
it's very recognizably influenced by our own, though, especially linguistically. So the guy you spoke to was the lead writer on it.
Yeah. The sort of creative lead, yeah.
He has a phenomenal grasp of languages.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is it crosses over with our world in lots of key ways. This world also has communism. It also has fascism. It also has hepatitis. Like it has
mariachi music.
Yeah, exactly. It has disco. And there's a moment, but I think there are moments where the crossover you can't totally ignore. So, and it's kind of a tricky position to be in, but this is also a world where being white carries a certain amount of privilege. Right?
Yes.
Which I think is responsible of them. They can't really do like a reverse racism planet. Like,
Well, they do
Star
have
Trek.
that guy, a character who is a race supremacist who is a black guy.
That's what I'm building to.
Is he Seminese?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's what I'm building to because it does a thing which it delivers you two racist characters very close proximity to each other.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting how it handles them because I thought the first encounter, which I think is the one that came up in a bunch of previews, is pretty effective. You meet a racist truck driver.
Yeah. Who's racist to your partner.
Who's racist to your partner. Your partner lays into him and you navigate a web of potential responses, most of which are fuck-ups of interesting array of kinds. You can overly defend your partner in a way that demeans and disempowers them.
Yeah.
You can perform your status as an ally of your partner in a way that, again, distracts. You can side with the racist, which has its own obvious set of issues. You can walk away because you can't handle it, or you can feign naivety, like, why are you angry with each other? And so, there's like the way I handled it was to sort of be like, to be, in that case, the professional who then pins this person to the wall and asks them loads of questions and lets my partner have their moment. I don't know if that's 100% right, but it's like, it challenges you to find this sort of kind of imperfect way through a very believable situation. And then the encounter you have immediately after that, and this isn't a spoiler, but like it's another character who embodies a bunch of positions that we might encounter in real life. It's a character who basically evinces a combination of like race war, paranoia, and eugenic theory. Yeah. Basically. But this character happens to be a physically imposing black character
called Measurehead,
who's who's the fact that they're physically imposing is key to their role in this particular moment. Yeah. You'd like to get past them and you can't. And I feel like in that moment, that actually, it doesn't, and I would absolutely cede to someone else's more expert analysis on that. It doesn't strike me as particularly elegant because it takes a bunch of tropes about, black physicality and so on from our world and embodies them. But it takes a bunch of sort of, real racism, from our world and puts them in a different place.
Yeah. And it's interesting, even though the names of the nations and peoples he's talking about are different because they're fictional, you can see that they map quite directly onto existing races and people. Although I think there's quite a lot of an interesting level of hatred he directs to people who eat potatoes, which is quite funny.
Yeah, right. But yeah, there are moments in it where and that's a rare conversation, and it's fully voice acted. Normally, the start of a conversation is voice acted, and the rest is just text. That one is fully voice acted, and it's interesting. Like I'm not raising it as like this is definitely, like, for me, it felt like a weak link in the start of the game because also the decisions I was being asked to make felt more cartoonish in a way. Mm-hmm. Like, it's asking you in one part whether you want to try and stand up to the physical challenge being posed by this person as he calls you weak. The other part
I would not survive that. I can't pick up a necktie.
Your heart give out. Like, the other part of it is, do you pretend to subscribe to his ideology? Do you actually subscribe to his ideology? But, his ideology is explicitly extremely cartoonish. It's expressed in all caps. And there are kind of like non sequitur jokes about potatoes, like, in it. Like,
well, I guess he's meant, is that to make him clearly a point of mockery, right?
Right, but
to make it impossible for you to nod along with
it's also sort of heavily accented. It's all caps. He's also a foreigner by the sounds of you know what I mean? It's sort of, it's just
well, is he? There's some interesting stuff
right,
about
but
the
he's not.
But
it's like one thing you can get out of him is that he might be feigning how foreign he actually is.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't get that.
Oh, sorry, maybe that's a minor spoiler. He's actually from Revachol. Like he's local, but this is a thing. Huh. It's clever, but I think that's an instance of a time where, and we are picking nits at this point, but like, that's a point where I think the game's cleverness and its intricacy of kind of constructing, pretty resonant questions out of fictional parts, I think gets the better of it. I think that's an example of not too clever, but sort of, it loses some of the heart of that situation in a kind of a sort of ad hoc philosophical debate with a cartoon.
Yeah.
Which doesn't feel quite right. Given that this is a game where you can talk to a bin.
Yeah.
Like, the one thing it succeeds at is that the human characters always have layers beyond the sort of the exterior. And this is an example where it just doesn't feel like they do sufficient credit. And they also step into a bunch of quite sensitive territory.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's the danger with it. Like, and it's the danger with the sort of, the fact that this is the sort of the pilgrimage of one big portly middle-aged dude trying to discover himself, which is a kind of story that, as we've said, can be done so uncritically that I think it has to fight a little bit extra hard to prove that it's not in that territory.
Yeah, I think from what I've played anyway, it largely exonerates itself. It's just, there are little fears I have as I play it. But, maybe maybe there isn't really moral hazard in this. Maybe that's just my imagination. I don't really know.
I think it's, I would say moral hazard probably, it's more that I think it's a really extraordinary bit of writing.
Yeah.
And a really extraordinary bit of game design. I think the thing I would hazard is like, this is not the only story you can tell with that. Mm-hmm. And I think, and maybe this is a bit, I might be, I was going to say wanking off the deep end here, but, like.
Is that why you're banned from the municipal pools?
It is. It's, that was the end of my 3-day bender. No, it feels like, we live in a society, Marsh. No. It feels like a game that is extraordinary in and of itself. And one of the reasons it's extraordinary is because it does come from a place outside of traditional game development, like Studio Zaum or essentially an Estonian art collective that have decided to make a game.
Yeah.
And it stems from a particular tradition. I know that the setting was developed over about 10 years. It was a pen and paper role-playing setting for the people involved. Like, it feels very personal.
Have you found the thinly disguised game studio, which is obviously them?
Not yet.
Have a look around for that. There's
yeah. Right. So
it's weird. Actually, I mean, just
go for it.
I looked at their website to try and find out about some writing credits. It's very difficult to pick up writing credits actually from their website. But you can look at their dev blog, and I went inarticulately. I could only click on either the first page or the very, very last page, which is obviously the first time they ever posted about the game. And they describe it as a short form RPG.
Oh boy.
Wow,
it escalated.
Yes.
What I was going to say is I believe, I understand, having met some people involved, that it really comes from a very genuine place, and that not that ultimately matters, but that also it comes from a place outside of games in an interesting way. It obviously is very game literate, but it's, it is not, necessarily a product of quite the same culture, and it is in some cases a response to that culture and a response to, culture more broadly and the kinds of questions that culture can ask. I think it does so successfully. However, the particular story that they've chosen to tell and the character they've chosen to tell it about feels like catnip to the corpus of games critics and its majority.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's definitely working.
Right. And as two white men who are sat here enjoying a lovely glass of boozy whiskey while talking about it, I kind of want to be conscious of being totally won over by it on that basis.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, like, this isn't supposed to be shady or anything, but I'm not entirely, I feel like I've seen the hand of that kind of dazzle in some of the reviews it's been receiving. And I think it deserves very, very high reviews. But I think the reasons for that are a little bit more technical and a bit more to do with the artistry of the thing than necessarily its significance as a story.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
because,
I agree.
Like,
although I don't know that you could have that same internal system with a character who wasn't undergoing mental crisis. I think
of course,
just the histrionic kind of level at which it operates you couldn't make this, you couldn't just strip out all of that stuff and say, here, players, make your own RPG in this system. I don't think as successfully.
No, but what I mean is, the other thing is, I think, there's plenty of work going on in, like, interactive fiction, Twine, and so on, that explores internal territory and decision making and so on from a variety of, positions, often that are not this one. One of it's almost like, I feel like the fact that it is, you see it get described like it's a detective game. And like, yeah, kinda. It is, but is it? You know what I mean? It's sort of like the cop game element is what gets you in the door. And I suspect it's what gets you in the door if you're a publisher as well. It's like, it's a way of,
there's a crime, what has been done, and you must find out about it.
And, it's playful with that and necessary with that.
Although weirdly, the trailer didn't mention really anything about that. So, right. I mean.
But it's like, this is the thing, like, there's
nor have we, actually, really.
Yeah. Like, no, we haven't either. But that's the point, right? Like, I think almost its weakest element is its, I think it might have been Andy Kelly's review for PC Gamer pointed out that, like, if you want to make a kind of genius Sherlock type detective with a crippling, flaw, you can do that. And that is true. But it feels like genre is its Achilles heel in a way, or like it's funny, or like I don't even think that necessarily is the fault of the developers so much. It's like the fault of games that we almost need this sort of structural imposition, and we expect the white dude protagonist and all the rest of the stuff that, like, I would would genuinely love to play an Uncharted game, but with this degree of interiority. Like, man slowly falls off train while having an argument with himself about aren't trains beautiful? And then you choose to cry. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, you can apply this as parody. One thing we should keep going back to is a very funny game to almost anything. I'd apply this to Halo, right? Like, just Master Chief, crippling fucking hangover. The Covenant here. It works, but it's almost like the step beyond this, I think, is applying this degree of using this mechanism. Because this is what I'm trying to get at, and I'm rambling, but this mechanism is so fucking good at putting you in the head of a character and having you experience what they experience. And in this case, it is effectively being used appropriately to shame. Right? It's like you are a fucking mess and you have all of this power and privilege and you're self-obsessed and every direction leads to being a dick because of that fact, essentially. That is the sting in the tail of everything. I would love to see this degree of, that degree of sensitivity and clever writing and interiority applied to a game about elevating a perspective we don't often see.
Sure.
Like, the version of Disco Elysium where you wake up and you're Kim.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think that's why they had to have Kim there, because he is, in as much as any of the things going on in your head are characters, he is also a character.
Yeah. I love the little snippets of his actual personality that you start to get. Yeah. But yeah.
He's a really, really well-written character as well, because you think immediately he's going to be the sidekick stereotype and kind of fastidious and by the rules. And he is sort of fastidious and by the rules, but there is a real person underpinning those actions. It's good.
Yeah, it is. I'm pretty, I've wanged on a lot, but it is really fucking good. It is really fucking good. I think it's the same thing you would apply to, like, certain kinds of prestige TV.
Yeah.
Right? You think about, like, rack up all your favorite prestige TV in your head and think about how many of them are about a man having a real severe midlife crisis. And suddenly you've got Mad Men, Breaking Bad, and The Sopranos, like, lining up to kind of make some of the same points as each other. And
I just love the game where you can knowingly lie to yourself. That is a really subtle thing to express in an RPG dialogue system. It does it. Thus play I in one person many people, and none contented. That's a little kind of Shakespeare for you there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. It made me think of, no, I'm not getting into that.
You can.
No.
I've already broken the pretentiousness barrier now. We can go the whole way.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing is like, this is, like a genuine discourse that you then have in your head, right? Like, like my fucking degree just cropped up and went, you could mention Whitman. And then it went, oh no, I'm not going to.
Don't silence the twat within you, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking about Orton Marsh. But yeah, like, but I think that's the thing. Like, I'm really fascinated to see for once, actually, and this is a huge testament to the game, I am genuinely interested to see what the discourse does with it.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a rebuttal coming. I think you can't deny its technical prowess. I think you can question some of its positioning.
It'll be a criticism, right? Rather than I hope it will be a criticism rather than a backlash.
Right, but we live in a society. Right?
Yeah.
We live in a society that's partially fueled, by your ability to make people click on a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so actually Disco Elysium is bad is going to be a thing someone writes. Someone's going to write it.
Yeah.
And
I'm only 8 hours in, so maybe it is absolutely
takes
terrible.
A fucking nosedive. Yeah. I can't believe you release all the nanomachines at the end.
Our inspector was right all along.
Exactly. If there's I'm not getting into that. Like, if you actually have a fist fight with your own esprit de corps or something, then actually that's brilliant. Actually, I would like to give a shout out to esprit de corps. It's a very good skill description.
I mostly ignore its advice.
Right. So esprit de corps is your sense of what cops might be doing at any given time. And if you have reasonably high esprit de corps, you actually see what's happening in your police station as they laugh about you.
Yeah, but that's a really beautiful scene.
It is beautiful.
I shouldn't say what happens with it, but you think it's going one direction, it's not really.
That is one of its strongest elements, I think, actually. Like, I know that, people have been more critical recently about games about police, basically, and the sensitivity involved in doing that. I think that'd be one thing I would say, totally. If that is something that potentially makes you uncomfortable, but Disco Elysium, the fact that, you're a cop, you're a hard-bitten cop who's woken up after one too many juice drinks, and now he's got to solve the big crime. It undermines that. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's...
Well, also, are you really a cop? I mean, is anybody really a cop in that place is another question.
Yeah, right. But nonetheless, the phoning back to the police station scene is fucking incredible.
In fact, there's so many moments where it seems like it's going for maybe a cruel laugh, or there's some kind of humor that is overriding the scene, and then it turns on a penny and delivers something which is deeply empathic and sensitive and really disarming. And that's happened quite a few times where I've just been laughing out loud for the most part, and then something happens, you go like, oh wow, okay.
Do you know what makes a kind of interesting...
moved momentarily.
Kind of counterpoint to this that just occurred to me.
No, tell me.
Creatively, they're completely different, but there are a few things mechanically that I thought would be interesting. Fleabag.
Okay.
Have you seen all of Fleabag?
I've watched as much of it that I can take, which was maybe about 10 minutes.
Okay.
I don't deal well with cringe comedy, and there's a lot.
I wouldn't see Fleabag as cringe comedy, interestingly.
There's a scene where she accidentally takes off her jumper and exposes her bra to a person that she's trying to get a loan out of. That scene is very embarrassing.
Right. And it just continues to pay off in a really interesting way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That whole show is genius. And one of the reasons it's genius is it has this meta element of her talking to herself.
Right.
Talking to the camera, talking to you. And it plays with that relationship in a really, really interesting way. And so I'm saying this now as someone who's played 6 hours of Disco Elysium. I feel like that's one of the ways it, like, I don't know, escalates and it sort of exceeds itself, is by addressing its own structure. I don't want to, like, if you haven't watched all of Fleabag's genuinely brilliant, and it, in both the first and the second season, has some really brilliant flourishes that, it has a conversation with itself that is as compelling as the story, which is kind of a real trick. And I think that Disco Elysium is kind of an interestingly similar place in a way. And interesting, I would totally play the Fleabag game in this engine. The one thing I wanted to say about Esprit de Corps, which led to a very good moment, is for some reason I needed to do a jump, which looked very dangerous. And the skill that is being checked, there are skill checks. We didn't talk about that at all. Well, most of the gameplay is, but never mind. There's some mechanics there. The skill that is being checked is your esprit de corps in this moment.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I just assumed it was some,
physical thing. No, for some reason your ability to do a cool jump that's about your vague sense of what a policeman might do.
Wow.
which sort of works. But I realized that, I wanted to try and game this because I wanted to succeed. So I realized that both my shoes and my trousers were applying a negative, a penalty to esprit de corps. So for this skill check only, I took my shoes and trousers off and then failed, which involved sort of like teetering on the edge of this sort of ledge, like my like filthy underwear flapping in the breeze on a rooftop. And I realized that the game had accidentally constructed a completely appropriate moment of like, you know, Kim stands there and doesn't try to ask me to explain why I've just taken my trousers off in order to do a jump. But it's like, these trousers make it harder for me to think of myself as a policeman. So I have to take them off. It's both completely unlikely and also deeply relatable.
I had to put on a dirty vest to yell into a furnace in my game. And the thing is, you think you're just going to shout up it, but he unleashes this bestial roar from deep within himself.
Did you choose to, reassure or, berate the postbox?
Oh, I reassured it.
Yeah.
I have a strong connection with inanimate objects, both in this world and in the game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's got a face, sort of.
Yeah.
I can't be mean to it. So one final thing I wanted to point out about Disco Elysium about how I've been playing it, even though I sort of click on everything and go through and talk to everybody, it has been successful, and I would be interested to know if this is the case for you, at naturally making me happy to leave some conversations without every option picked, happy to walk away from some conversations, happy to not take every option or accept every mission given, or do everything that I put on my task list. Like, one of my tasks is find some cigarettes, and I've decided not to.
Right.
And that is, in a word, role playing. Right? Not, this is the opposite of Destiny. This is not task completion. This is actually choosing what my character would and wouldn't do. Have you found that you are not, because in a traditional RPG you would rinse the dialogue trees, right?
I started doing that, but I've been slowly stopping doing that for the reasons you mentioned. I'm just choosing to ask about the things I'm really interested in, or express myself in the ways that I feel my character is going.
Right. Cool. Yeah. Cause that I think is also to its huge, credit. Like not a lot of role-playing games achieve role-playing. And this one definitely does. But I understand that you've been doing some role-playing of your own recently.
I have.
Some pen and paper role-playing.
Would you like to guess what race I'm playing, Chris?
Goblin.
Yes! Weirdly, I listened to the podcast in which you accused me of being a goblin after I'd already chosen to be a goblin. Yeah.
Have you listened to the D&D podcast we did?
Yes, I have. Yeah. Well, it's obviously my natural role.
Yeah, exactly. I can't believe they didn't figure out where I was going with the environment called the Goblin Marsh. Like for 4 hours of that session, I'm proud of them, but also ashamed at the same time. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm playing, a game called Simbaroom, or maybe Simbaroom. Not quite clear how it's pronounced.
Spelling in the show notes.
Yes. It's a cool world. It's basically, I mean, it's not that different from...
We live in a cool world, Marsh.
Your staple fantasy RPGs, except that it's obviously quite a dark fantasy. And it's sort of what would be the consequences of a debilitating war against an all-powerful force of darkness. It's sort of like what would really happen after the Lord of the Rings, which is that there would be a fuckload of refugees from the lands that are just being completely decimated by goblins. Or, sorry, orcs. Not in this case, though. There aren't. The goblins...
Apologize to me.
So, Giant Nation has had a war with the forces of darkness. That land is now basically a dead land, and they've had to move over these mountains back to the site of where their people originally came from, only to discover that the site of where their people originally came from is also more or less a dead land for reasons that are not quite clear, and much of it has been overtaken by a gigantic forest called Davokar, and the forest is slowly waking up and repelling these new colonists. And so there's an interesting sort of thing about colonization there, which is quite interesting and written into the very fabric of not only the lore, but also the mechanics of the game as well, relate to sort of betraying nature or not betraying nature to a certain extent. And and nature isn't necessarily a force of good in this case either. But it's very, I mean, I fucking love it. I fucking love role playing. I love being a goblin. I'm a little goblin grave digger.
Of course you fucking are.
Yeah.
Everyone's first proper role playing character is make themselves.
Yes, and like myself, I'm also haunted by the ghost of my former master, and I wait screaming every night. Owen! And I love strangling people as well.
Love it or good at it?
I'm just really good at it, to be honest. It's just
well, it's good to love what you do.
Yeah. I don't think anybody else knew in the group that I had these strangling skills, so they were slightly confused by why I kept on leaping on people and trying to strangle them, rather than doing more obvious forms of attack. There was a logic to it. But it's really interesting. And I didn't know if you'd ever heard of it. I was wondering.
I hadn't actually. Well, so I think, because you're playing with Jim, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Jim
right. So I think I'd seen
it.
some tweets about it. I think I'd seen Jim tweet about it. But other than that, I knew nothing about it.
It feels quite, it's very combat oriented. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of, the social stuff feels quite improvisational and quite loose. There are kind of skills you can use to tweak your success in social situations, but most of the kind of skills, combat is so deadly that you'd be foolish to not focus to some extent on just min-maxing your singular combat abilities, which is fine, but it's quite difficult to work out from the books how one does that. There's a lot of stuff about juggling stats, and so you put you put points into skills, which then allow you to kind of do a dice roll against one particular stat rather than another. So you can then sort of, rather than having all these different dice rolls in different situations against a wide variety of skills, you can focus them all into your stat that you're putting all your points into. You see what I mean? But the manuals are fucking insane. Like, doesn't seem to be any kind of order to them at all.
Man.
It's really difficult to work out. Like, I'm an alchemist. I want to be able to make potions. And I thought, well, okay, it'd be a good idea just to write down all the potions that I can make at novice level.
Yeah.
To do that, I need to reference 6 different places in 2 different books. It was quite a task. I didn't bother to do it.
Right. Like, this is the thing. Ease of access to the rules you actually need is like one of the great tricks of pen and paper. Like, I don't want to speak for Pip, but like, I think Pip ran a really, really fun game of a game called Bubblegum Shoe at Shucks, which is a sort of teen detective role-playing game. So Veronica Mars or Nancy Drew mystery kind of thing. And Pip had not GM before or like run a rule system before. And it's amazing how difficult or how rarely I think games effectively express, I think, the truth of most pen and paper role-playing systems, which is that they are sandboxes, not a kind of prescribed set of things to follow. And when the rules and the essential kind of rules are mixed in with the kind of pre-existing lore or with pre-baked scenarios and things, that's like, this is a bad analogy, it's like spreading the sand for your sandbox around a sculpture garden, and you have to go find the sand before you're allowed to kind of make your own thing. Like, not a good analogy, Marsh. I warned you ahead of time. Didn't really work.
That's fine.
But we can all move on now. My inner analogy sense is like screaming at me. Like, I'd be interested, when you say this is super combat heavy, like, why are you engaging in combat? Is it to progress the story, or is it loot heavy? Is it character building?
It's a very dangerous place.
I see.
There's narrative reasons for it to be dangerous. I mean, I'm sure Jim as a GM could just reduce the amount of combat in it, but since most of the book is about combat, it would feel like you weren't engaging with the role playing game systems.
No, that's interesting, because like I find combat is often the thing that's hardest to make interesting. So, have you found it edifying?
Yes, but it takes a while because the systems are so opaque and it's very difficult to put together the ways in which you're meant to be fighting. And there are lots of little rules that aren't necessarily obvious that are hidden on, for no real good reason, page 153, far away from anything else that might relate to it. That the first session, we found it incredibly difficult. Like, two of us almost died in one of the kind of tutorial combat sessions. But I think as we get into it, apparently the players, generally speaking, find that the opposite is true, that it's quickly possible to create characters who are almost unkillable and overpowered.
So you made a goblin gravedigger who strangles people.
Well, strangling is really good. It doesn't, once you get your bony little goblin fingers around somebody's neck, what are they going to fucking do? Nothing.
Ever again. Only sleep.
Shh. Yeah, I don't know how the combat will bed down over some sessions. It does seem like there's all kinds of power disparities. It feels very much like somebody decided to create their own set of rules for their, off-brand D&D game and span that out into a book.
I think that's how most of these things start.
But of course, I don't necessarily know that it applies more widely to how other people might play those same set of rules. Like, it feels like it's been designed very well for certain classes and certain characters, and then you wonder quite how the other things fit together, and maybe they don't at all.
That's cool, though. I don't know do you remember our Numenera campaign?
I do. I remember it very fondly. I wish we'd seen it through, really. But
I've been thinking about rebooting that for a long time, but moving everything forward. But yeah, because I like that system and I like that world as well. But that was my first time GMing. Yeah, no,
it has a similar thing to Numenera, where you can spend XP in the moment.
Yeah, I like stuff like that.
And I think that is a good innovation.
I try to add stuff like house rules a lot. I've talked about it on the pod before, but this Star Wars campaign, which is now 3 years old, which is nuts. Like, there's nothing actually better in games than a RPG group that keeps going. Because, and I'll tell you, like, the payoff is absolutely extraordinary. When players get sufficiently invested that you have to do less as a GM and they understand the world. Like, I had my players include, Dave Jackson, you might know, Marsh from PlayStation Access, and our friend Will Salmon. And the last session we had a conversation where the two, like, normally if something is, they try to figure out the feasibility of luring a ship to a particular location, like, based on what's possible with hyperspace communication in the Star Wars universe. And normally this would be a question of, maybe an out-of-character question, like, what do I know about how, ship-to-ship communication across vast distances works?
Yeah.
But we've entered this point in year 3 now where the two of them had this entire conversation in character and were right about all of the technology and didn't need me at all. Like, they figured out it wouldn't work for various reasons, or it wouldn't be reliable based on just years of experience of the setting.
Oh, wow.
And didn't need me, and it was the best moment. Like, it was just the best feeling of, like, holy shit, like, we're now in this, like, particular mindset. Like, we've arrived at an understanding of how the technology of this universe works, where we don't need rules. We don't need to roll a dice. We don't need to look something up in the book. We just get it. Like, this is, and particularly because they were denying themselves a plan as well. Like, they had this particular plan to achieve something, and they went, no, this won't work. Not for, oh, we'll never roll the right number, or Chris won't allow it, but, oh, well, actually, we could ping and ping and ping and ping, but there's no guarantee that we'll have a timescale for when they'll arrive. And that actually is not very useful to us because we're trying to ambush this ship, and therefore it's not a good idea.
Right.
And it's like, shit, yeah. Great. It's the best, honestly. Yeah. I did a bunch of pen and paper role playing while I was out at Shucks that, I might quickly draw attention to. So I did a bunch of one shots, obviously, because it's a convention, you just sign up for things. But both were for, relatively new systems, both of which I thought were kind of interesting and maybe worthy of a shout out in this mid-podcast pen and paper role-playing section that we're now doing. One of them was a game called Collateral Damage, which I think is either has been kickstarted or is going to be kickstarted or is coming out soon. I'm not sure. It's by a guy called Daniel Salcido. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But he ran the game for us. Very much a sort of passion project of a couple of years, I think. But the premise, which I really like, is it's a pen and paper role-playing game which is designed for one-shots, i.e. you generate your characters and the setting every time you play.
Right.
And the concept is that you are, the world you live in is a movie, but you and the other players are extras in the movie. The movie's happening around you. It's not what your own story is necessarily about. But as part of you, in addition to sort of generating your characters, you also generate the setting and the genre of the film. So when I played it, it ended up being a Western that was always also a coming-of-age story that the GM titled When Cowboys Become Cowmen. So it was this sort of Breakfast Club sort of, but it became a Western, but it was more of a modern Western. So it's set in like rural Colorado in the 80s. And then you also randomize like what each of the 3 acts of the movie are actually about. So the first part was about a murder. So it's like the star football player's been murdered and, but this is a cow town. Like who could have done it? And, that was actually, genuinely fun, kind of dice light and rules light, but really fun for your only goal as players is to survive the film. Because you could equally get a superhero movie and the building's falling down around you, but your objective is just to get to work on time. Like this kind of thing. And that was really fun. The other one, I did, was, I played an evil piano player called Clammy.
Clammy.
Yeah. I named myself Clammy. And his character flaw was that he always played the wrong music at the wrong time. So when we discovered the body of this teenager who'd been murdered or the crime scene was happening, we were in the background, I just started playing all of like the end of prom hits I could think of. Like Hope You Have a Time of Your Life, like that kind of thing that like this teenager would never hear. Anyway. And then the other one I played, was, and I'm unfortunately, I remembering the handle, which was, Socrates of the creator, but not his full name, which is bad podding of me, but I'll give you the link. But it's a variant on Blades in the Dark, which I know Jim likes, called Neon Black, which is basically cyberpunk Blades in the Dark, basically using the same system.
So there's a sci-fi one as well. What's that called?
I can't remember.
Okay, right. Yes.
This is, I think, very much a homebrew.
Okay.
I think it's actually available through Itch at the moment. But I really liked it. And, that was a lot of fun because Blades in the Dark is a cool system. Blades in the Dark, if you're not aware, is a kind of heist game, a heist role-playing game where you have where it's, time doesn't just go forwards. So you prep the heist, then you jump into the moment of action for the heist, but that skill checks are just as likely to happen in the past as the present. So in our case, it was, part of our plan in this, I won't go into all the details, but involved, we had to create some sedatives that looked like real drugs. But the actual scene where the chemist on the team tries to create the drugs happens not in chronology.
Right.
It happens at the point where the pill is slipped to the guard. And then you flash back and do the scene where the pills were made.
So a guard would maybe stumble across you and you go, but I bribed him 10 hours ago.
Right, yeah. But then you do that. It's not just that you roll to see if you did. You do that scene. So that can do additional complications, right? So like, so in this case, it was interesting because we had to create this drug, and that we knew this person had just taken to find out what it did. So we've managed to, we'd done the skill check in the moment to slip this guy the drug to distract the bodyguard or whatever. But then you do the flashback to, but what actually happened in the drug lab? And someone was like, well, I think my character would be there hanging out. He's probably actually testing the material. So we ended up getting like a success, but with a disadvantage, like some kind of deficit on that roll, which meant that our lookout, it turns out, had been high this entire time because he's still coming down from having been testing the fake drugs the day before. And so you can end up adding these complications and stuff. That's Blades in the Dark, which is a really cool system, but this was a really fun sort of cyberpunk layer on top of it, particularly because I ran Cyberpunk 2020, like the 80s role-playing system for PlayStation last year, and I've been recently reading up on Cyberpunk Red, which is the new pen and paper version of the game.
Oh, they've updated it.
Yeah, they've updated it ahead of 2077 coming out, which I've been reading for no reason whatsoever.
Of course.
That is, it's a fun, like, I've got, lots of thoughts about Cyberpunk for a lot of different reasons, but that is a fun, that in itself is a fun sort of sandbox to play around in. It's interesting to see other things being done with it.
I do, one of the major things that changes how I feel about role-playing games is how mathsy they are. Because they're not mathsy. That's good. I find it very difficult to remember, just even the trivial things about the number of, dice that I'm meant to be rolling against which particular number and what kind of modifier it has. And D&D, I like D&D, for some reasons. I really like I like positional combat that you can express through miniatures. I think that adds...
I'm very anti-miniatures with D&D, which is weird.
No, I mean...
Given my other hobbies.
I like that in the context of D&D. I think that's something that D&D has that I appreciate, but I don't need it in every other game. It's just that I quite like it when it's in D&D. But I don't like any of any of the stats juggling that occurs in D&D. I find it really kind of laborious. So I prefer to be kind of free of that stuff altogether. Really,
it's funny. D&D is interesting because they have done an incredible job of at creating tools like the apps and things that make that stuff much easier. And also because it's the biggest game, there is inevitably like a cottage industry of people making great cheat cards and stuff.
Right.
So you can get all of that stuff you actually want. Like I tend to travel around. Like when I went to Vancouver, I didn't use them, but I usually bring, like, I don't play much D&D unless I have to GM something suddenly, which has happened more than once. So I usually have like the emergency kit, which doesn't involve any books. It's just a GM screen, my dice, and 4 decks of cards, which are just monsters, NPCs, and vital stats, basically, and conditions. And so you can create a scenario by drawing them at random. You can use them as a reference to just lay it out in front of you.
Right.
And like there are ways of making D&D elegant, I think. Because it's a useful omni system that everyone understands.
Yeah.
The other thing D&D is really good for is, it's great for streams. It's great for, so simple dice systems where you maybe roll 1 or 2 dice in a check, are great because they're passable. I think people underestimate that. Like everyone, a 1 and a 20 in D&D both have real natural drama that comes from the moment that doesn't need much extrapolating. Basically it's like, the way I would frame it from a design point of view is how long after the dice is rolled is the effect manifest? Because that is directly inversely proportional to the drama created by the dice roll. If the moment the roll comes up, that's the most drama you can get. And D&D's good for that. You roll that D20, it comes up 20, everyone cheers. It comes up 1, everyone laughs. Like, it's immediate. It's not very elegant, but like, it does a lot. Whereas like the contrary to that is the Fantasy Flight system for Star Wars. It's now called Genesis system. They've made it.
I don't think I've played it.
I think you'd find it really interesting. In fact, I was actually talking to Jim about it like a couple of months ago about whether he would enjoy running it, because I think you'd really like it because it takes away a lot of that, but it creates completely weird results. So the way it works is because it's a Fantasy Flight thing, it doesn't use numbered dice. They have symbols on them. And in the Star Wars game, these are specific, but they're the same sets of symbols in the generic version of this. So essentially, you have good dice and bad dice. And I think they're D8s, D12s are the 2 sort of levels of dice. So you have it's like purple and red and green and yellow. And green and yellow are 2 tiers of good and purple and red are 2 tiers of bad. So big bad dice, small bad dice, big good dice, big, small good dice.
Right.
Your skill in a thing will help you build the pool of good dice. And there are bonus dice you can add and so on based on circumstance. So like, your skill is this, but because you are in an advantageous situation, I'll throw in a bonus dice or whatever, something like that. Or upgrade a dice from a green to a yellow. And then the difficulty of a situation is the bad dice that get added to it. And each of these dice have symbols on them that are the opposite of each other. Okay. So there are success symbols on the good dice, whereas the bad dice have failure symbols on them. And there are advantage symbols on the good dice where there are disadvantage symbols on the bad dice. And what you do is you roll all the dice at once.
Yeah.
And then you, equal symbols, so success and failure and advantage and disadvantage cancel each other out.
Right.
And so you pass it down to what is left. And what's really cool about this is it's the opposite of the D&D thing where you get that immediate hit.
Yeah, yeah.
But what it allows for is a situation where you succeed, but with loads of disadvantage. Or you fail with loads of advantage. Or you can get a neutral result, which is a really weird thing that can't happen in D&D.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this is then there are some mechanical things. So for example, in the Star Wars game, the sort of game mechanic side of this is like, in the Star Wars game, some every weapon has a crit value. And so if you, whether or not you, hit is down to, do you roll more successes than failures? And then how much damage you do is how many more successes do you have above what you needed?
Right.
So every success adds a point of damage or whatever it is. But if you get, a number of advantage equals to the weapon's crit value, you also do a critical hit. Right? But on any other check, so that sometimes is a prescribed effect. But in any other check, it's like, you can do something abstract like, getting a certain amount of advantage gives you a bonus action on top of the thing you just did. Because you may have failed, but you did it with enough to give yourself some space to move or something.
Right.
And it creates all these really nuanced situations where you can succeed and fail and succeed at the same time.
That's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Or you can the inverse of that is you succeed, but with loads of threat, which means you succeed, but the person you've just succeeded against gets an immediate free action against you.
Right.
Which and that I really like because it can create some really weird situations, particularly where you're not in
you killed somebody, but they still fire a shot at you as they die.
Right. Or, you kill someone, but they scream.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? It puts a lot of pressure on the GM, but I think it's really healthy pressure to be add a twist to this. Everything gets an interesting thing and then it's really interesting when you get into a situation where it's like a social scenario where there aren't really fixed rules for how to spend advantage and disadvantage. It's like you failed to persuade someone, but you have advantage with this, which is that maybe the advantage in that case is that your attempt to deceive them was so unsuccessful that they have no idea that it happened. Right? And that's the consequence of having failed at it, but with an advantage. Whereas, failing with threat is they know you were trying to pull one over on them and so on.
Right.
I appreciate we're now fully on banging on about role-playing games, but that is, I think, a cool system for that reason. Because success and failure are kind of boring without a mitigating thing. Yeah. And the dice system gives the GM excuse to mitigate. Because if you fail at something, if we're playing D&D and you fail and I say, you failed, but a weakness has opened up, you can try and exploit it. That feels like I'm handing you a get out. Similarly, if you succeed and I say, yeah, but you have fallen over, then I'm being a dick. Whereas I like this dice system because it naturally creates scenarios where it's you look at the dice pool, we all agree. And then there are also triumph and despair symbols. Sorry, those are the actual apex things. There is only one of them and they're on the 12-sided dice, but they activate sort of mega things. But succeeding with despair is a real thing where it's sort of I've succeeded, but the wings of the ship have fallen off.
Oh wow, that seems really interesting. So, how many different kinds of games does that system apply to? All the Fantasy Flight games?
No, so they put it out for Star Wars initially, and that's 3 different games, but they're all an interconnected system, basically. And then they released it last year, I think, as the Genesis system, which is a system without a setting.
Oh, okay.
The idea is you just apply it. I think they release settings as add-on packs, basically.
Okay, yeah.
But the idea is it's just a dice system, and you just do anything you want with it, because it can apply to. It's just a fairly interesting way of, I think they come up with some sort of basic, how to outline skills and things, how to think about stats, that kind of thing. But, it's cool.
That does sound good. One of the reasons I want to mention Simba on the podcast was because I wanted to throw it out to our listeners about whether they've played it and they have any house rules for it that might make it easy. Because I do feel like it's a game that needs its second edition to kind of bring all of its rules into some kind of fucking sensible order, but also just to kind of weed out the strange power spikes that exist within them. And I know there are a lot of house rules out there, but if any players have their own, any listeners have their own, I'd like to hear them.
Yeah, right. I think that's a good shout because, I think house ruled every game I've run for any length of time into oblivion at this point, and I think it's completely natural. So yeah. I mean, it sounds like this game originates from a set of D&D house rules, right?
Probably. Yeah.
Honk.
Also, honk. Honk, honk.
Honk, honk. Quoth the goose. We took a super long break just now, Marsh.
Yes.
We did. And, in that time, I forgot what we were talking about, but I believe it was pen and paper role-playing games.
Yeah.
So here's a segue to questions.
Let's do it.
Why not? Could you read me some questions?
Wow, that was so slick. Almost imperceptible.
Yeah,
as a
exactly.
segue.
What a flawless break.
Stieg writes, Dear 12-button keypad and themed plastic overlay, I recently learned that just 17 months ago in May 2018, there was announced a new console, the Amico, that is sort of a modern reimagining of the original Intellivision. From this, I extract 3 questions. 1. Do you have thoughts or opinions on this matter? Is it too early to tell? It has some nice features. It could be interesting, I guess. 2. Do you have opinions on the original Intellivision? It was a game box my family owned before they got a NES. Oh, how I loved those little plastic sleeves and the creepy box art of games like Microsurgeon, Beauty and the Beast, Atlantis, and Sewer Sam. I'm not sure that all of those are real games.
Is Atlantis? Is Atlantis to someone? Is an Atlantis to someone who is like prejudiced against people from under the sea?
I may have added the extra T on the end as a result of a lack of sobriety. 3. Did you have a nice breakfast? Today I enjoyed 2 bananas and a morning glory muffin. It was wonderful. Stay hydrated.
Beg your pardon?
Steve. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. It's got a very icy topping.
Oh, God. So, question 1, no, I hadn't heard of this. Question 2, I'm too young. Question 3, it was okay. This morning I woke up in a fairly scabby hotel near Paddington and got a McDonald's breakfast on the way to the train.
Oh, a McMuffin?
A McMuffin. A sausage McMuffin with hash brown, and because I was in a rush, an orange juice, not the surprisingly okay McDonald's coffee.
That sounds disgusting, but also delectable.
It was bad for me and bad for the causes of me.
I don't really have any opinions on the Amico. I mean, it looks fine as far as these kind of new revisions of old consoles go. I don't have any specific nostalgia for the Intellivision. I think my family had a BBC and then I had a NES. So I'd never had, a lot of the other, I never had Atari nostalgia or Intellivision nostalgia. As far as I know, I had the similar sort of games on it I don't remember any of the games on it being exclusive. Maybe Beauty and the Beast was, but I remember Lode Runner, and other games of that ilk being on all those platforms. So I'm afraid I don't know. I didn't have breakfast this morning because
it is the most important meal of the day, even if you squander it as I did.
Well, I had too many onions last night, Chris, which meant I was fasting all morning, unfortunately. So
that's the opposite of breakfast, as people tell you.
I know. I needed to expel gas rather than consume matter.
Well,
I think we sufficiently answered that question.
Yep. Yeah. And maybe laid out a particular scenario in your personal Disco Elysium.
Indeed. Yeah.
The onion says hello.
Shut up, onion. Shut up. Greg writes, what's the difference between pretentious and ambitious? This podcast may have already been an illustration in one of those extremes. Would you call a game pretentious in a review, or is that generally not a useful criticism? Is there a better way to talk about that potential kind of annoyance? Thanks for the great podcast, Greg.
I kind of don't like the word pretentious.
No, I don't. I think it's always a trap in reviews as well.
Yeah. I think it can either be a defensive mechanism, i.e. this is a game that has some sort of intellectual kind of thing going on, and I'm not sure how to deal with it, so I will write it off. It can be quite sort of defensive and reactive in that way. I think also...
I think the thing is, people don't differentiate between something which is aspirational, which perhaps doesn't succeed, and something which is pretending to a certain level of intellectualism out of a vanity or a sense of kind of self-aggrandizement. And the latter is what I would call pretentious. But I think a lot of people just see something which is trying to be clever but doesn't quite make it and call that pretentious. And I don't think that's necessarily fair. I quite like things which are trying to do good things but fail.
I think often, and I think actually I would argue that as, and there's a bit of a broader point, but as the sort of, the tropes of kind of genre fiction and kind of, if you think about it in terms of sci-fi or something, the kind of sci-fi tropes provide kind of arenas in which you can interrogate certain ideas. And the most interesting new works of science fiction, be they games or otherwise, often break out of those expected areas in how they go about exploring those ideas. Disco Elysium is an interesting example of that, right? It's not science fiction, but it's got lots of technology that's speculative or not real. It's all variants on actual 20th century technology, but taken in a different direction. It is a fictional universe, but positioned in a very specific place and time that is unusual, and therefore it can kind of get away with a lot of its sort of inventions about society. I think pretentious for me in games is when you embark on a kind of big, philosophical discussion of a a debate that's been had a million times in exactly the way that you're having it. And so the game that I would hold up to this, and I was about to say I was sorry for throwing David Cage under the bus, but am I? And is Detroit Become Human, which is where you end up in this thing. Well, okay, so this is a discussion about robotics and AI and what do it mean to be man?
Yes. What would this character look like if she was having a shower, for example?
Exactly. The big questions. But done in the setting where that happens.
Yeah.
In the manner in which that is conducted. And that for me is pretentious, not on the basis that because it's not ambitious, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the crucial difference, right? It's not that they are interchangeable terms for the same thing. Maybe this is what I'm wangling around towards. It's that they're actually very different things. Ambitious, you can be ambitious and fail. And you can recognize that ambition in the attempt to create, because you recognize in ambition, the attempt to create something. What you recognize in pretentiousness is the attempt to create the pretense of something.
Yeah.
And like, there's a big difference between interrogating different kinds of life that might exist, or how we might be able to conceive of machines as alive, and doing a big old Blade Runner all down your front.
Back to the Morning Glory muffin there.
I was thinking vomiting, but sure.
Oh, okay. Right.
Hence
sorry.
all down rather than all up. It's a really crucial directional sort of directional spewage.
Yeah.
Speaking of directional spewage, continue.
Francis writes, "Hi, Podling peeps. I'm a little late for this one, but on the subject of game names, I feel there was a missed opportunity with Untitled Goose Game. It should have been called Honk. I like this name mostly for the sake of making game reporters say it out loud." Oh, hang on, this continues. Sorry. Regarding Dresden Files, which is something referred to on a podcast you haven't listened to, the story I heard is that Jim Butcher, the author, attended a writing course where he tried to write the most derivative thing he could after an argument with the facilitator. She announced it good enough to publish, and here we are. Amusing if true, possibly libelous if it isn't. We disown this anecdote altogether. I agree that the first couple of books, I agree about the first couple of books, which are apparently shit. But it quickly became my favourite series. Each book builds on the last and it really becomes something special. The audiobooks are also a treat, featuring excellent narration from James Masters, who apparently plays Spike from Buffy.
It is Spike from Buffy, yeah.
Anyway, you want questions?
Yes.
He asked, presumably rhetorically. I can't remember if this was asked recently, but here goes. What game universe do you find so interesting as to be worth novelization? Are there any that have actually been written that you recommend? Love your work. Regards, Francis.
Right, so I want to talk about Honk briefly. Does it have an exclamation mark?
It was capital letters, and I believe it had an exclamation mark. Let me find
fine.
the page again.
Because if it does, we've fundamentally entered the territory of musical titles.
That's not a bad thing.
Stomp, etc. In which case, that's not a bad thing. I helpfully support that adaptation. What I would indicate towards this point is a good interview with House people by Vice this week, in which they talk about why they ended up calling it Untitled Goose Game. And the reason for it is because they put that name out in the trailer as basically not a joke, but like, this is where we're at with it. And then everyone in the entire universe sent them their suggestions for names for the game. And they were too stubborn to take anyone else's suggestion.
Okay.
Which I can feel. Like, I feel that. Like, and so, I think they did the absolute right thing, in the end.
It's a good name.
Honk is good too.
Or with Kingdoms of Goose Reckoning, maybe.
Yeah. I think the thing I wrote on Twitter at the time was Heat Signet You Are.
Yes.
But you're not a swan, so it doesn't quite work, but close enough.
Somebody, who I can't remember who it was, famous games industry person,
John Carmack,
suggested various titles of the Goose Game through the ages, what they might have been, and I tweeted to that thread that maybe in the 18th century it could have been A Rake's Progress to the Pond.
Nice.
To the lake.
Oh shit,
lake,
you fucked it.
Jesus.
Jesus Christ. The yeah,
I've got all kinds of internal dialogue saying me I'm a prick.
Yeah,
right now.
I feel like both of us are haunted by the 2 points in English literature skill that won't won't shut the fuck up, but lead you continually astray.
Yeah.
With regard to the question, what setting do you find most interesting enough for a novel? It's kind of loaded, isn't it? Because I've been thinking about this recently because there's a lot of Warhammer novels. A lot of Warhammer novels. And I'm kind of impressed.
Some of them are okay.
Some of them are great. Some of them are okay. Some of them are bad. But I'm impressed by how many there are. And I was recently thinking about it because I think I went for the most recent, like, Black Library, open submission because I do it every time they do it because it's fun. And there's an art to understanding how many things happen in a novel, I think. When you think about it in abstract, you think, I could tell the whole story. Just the whole, start to finish. Right. Everything. All the war.
Yeah.
Everything. Big space marine, little man. Scary demon. The whole lot. That's it. An orc.
I mean, that is kind of it.
It is. But but I think people underestimate how much you can fit into a novel, to be honest. Yeah. A novel is often just a kind of one-way trip through a fiction from point A to point B.
Oh yeah.
You see parts of it from the journey. It's like a train ride.
You'd want a fiction where there was a small area of it which you could, accommodate as part of the novel.
Right, absolutely. So, like, this is where, like, but I suppose I reject the aspect of this question that is, like, legitimizing things by novelizing them, as if novels carry any weight. And I say this because, like, I kind of try to alternate between reading a worthy novel and a novel about space marines.
Right, yeah, I mean, the novel isn't necessarily an elevated art form. There's plenty of shit novels out
exactly.
there. But at the same time, I mean, I think being able to write being able to write an average to good novel within a fiction says something about that fiction's level of expansiveness and the consistency with which it's thought through, I suggest. And those things often underpin games.
I think that's a beautiful idea that is not actually underpinned by the reality of the success of things like Twilight or...
Oh, yeah, those are successful. I wouldn't even say that was average to good, though.
Oh, yeah, fair.
I did caveat it in quite a cheeky way. I don't know. I mean, Disco Elysium obviously has a huge backstory to its world, which is only partially explored, and that seems very interesting. I don't know if especially, I mean, you have to count these things on their merits, right? I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say out of the gate, oh yes, I want a novel in that world. I would like a good novel in that world, right? I'd like a good novel.
All right, maybe to flip it, because I think you can count off the games that support this.
Yeah.
Right. What game would you want there to be a novel for, or to write a novel for that maybe doesn't obviously support it? Because for some reason, the thing that popped into my head was Opus Magnum. Like just really competitive alchemists in an endless drive to further perfect mechanisms that are pointless.
Yeah.
There's something there. There's a Primo Levi short story there at the very least.
Yeah. I don't really know.
Well,
but I can tell you, I'm sure I've told this on the podcast before. There's 1,000% chance that I've told this on the podcast before. I once read a Total War, a Rome Total War novelization. And,
Caesar flew into space. His troops were very small, but so many.
Well, you say this. So there's a line in it. Two characters, two Romans are talking to each other. And one of them says, carpe diem, as the Greeks say, means seize the day. Which is, carpe diem in Latin, which is the language they're speaking.
That's incredible.
Anyway.
That's incredible.
It's,
I love that at least one of them was Mark Strong as well.
Yeah. I like to think that was intentional on the part of the writer, but who knows?
Like you sort of dirty protest.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I'm trying to think, what would be the hardest novels, right? Civilization? That one's a toughie.
Yeah. I mean, probably quite racist as well.
Yeah, exactly.
That game, if you play it the way it's intended, supports all kinds of terrifying tropes about sort of manifest destiny, I think, really. If you try to narrativize it, I mean, obviously as a game, you're just playing it, but...
Well, it's essentially Colonial supermarket sweep.
Yes. Yeah. That is an analogy that holds up.
And but that just didn't fit on the box. Like Sid Meier's Colonial supermarket sweep.
Yeah.
But if you say it fast enough, it sounds like civilization, so it's fine.
Shall I move on?
Yeah.
Okay. Henry writes, Dear Bar Crows, as a kid growing up in the 90s, I organised my games collection in handwritten lists, giving each title a personal rating, along with one particular piece of information. Whether the game could be paused or left unattended without requiring input or not. While this seems to be an arbitrary way to categorise games, this was crucial information since I could get pulled away from my ST by my parents at any time to attend dinner. Well, not really any time. I mean, dinner's at a dinner
Exactly.
time.
Well, we don't know that.
Indeed, we did. We're judging you prematurely.
Sorry, fat.
Back on that Morning Glory muffin.
Fuck.
This is crucial information because I could be pulled away from my ST for dinner, do chores, or answer an old school landline phone call. What weird binary categorization system would you say has been personally helpful to you? Keep podding those fantastic casts. Henry from Germany.
Smooth alt-tabbing.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. That is really good. Yeah.
Thanks. Like,
Save anywhere as well, I guess. But,
save anywhere is good, but smooth alt-tabbing, oh man, it's such a relief.
Yeah.
When your monitor doesn't freak out or...
It's been a while since it has for me. So, I mean, is this a problem of the past that doesn't
I don't know,
beset
it comes up
games
every now and then. I think, I've been aware of it recently because, my laptop is a Surface Book and it has a weird resolution because it has a very high resolution screen. And so most games I'll just run at, 1080p because it's fine for the size of screen that it is. But this requires some shifting and it can cause some problems. It makes me very aware of it. But I think this is more a factor of me having been very aware of it going really well with Destiny. And there's the question of do you want the sound to cut out when you alt tab or do you want the sound to continue? Destiny is a sound continues. It's not actually terrible. Background music is quite pleasant. You can kind of sit in the background, remind you that Destiny is there.
Yeah.
I don't need that.
And you're not playing it. You're not earning anything in it. What are you doing? What are you doing with your time?
Just work normally. And then it's like, oh, it's time for a 5-minute break. I can play a game of Control and shoot some people with a scout rifle. It's very
There's
good.
a question on Control, is it so?
Oh, cool. Oh, control the game. I finished that. But yeah, alt-tabbing would be mine. What would be yours?
I can't think of anything good, but I will say, in fact, so I don't know why this made me remember. We didn't say anything about how good Disco Elysium looks or how interesting its art style is. So it's obviously an isometric. Obviously, I mean, it is an isometric game, pseudo-isometric, and
the art's fucking amazing.
It obviously uses 3D assets, but they've all been overpainted in 2D. In an impressionistic way. So if you scroll out, it looks like Planescape Torment or one of those games which has pre-rendered assets. But then you zoom in and you realize that everything is given this sort of impressionistic Dorby kind of texture, which is beautiful. But one of the things that just popped into my head as you're saying that is that when you bring up any kind of menu, or dialogue screen in the game, the background to it is semi-transparent. You can still see the world through it. But if any dialogue is playing in the world, in the background, the dialogue box through that filter of that overlaid menu is in a completely different font. What? It's really good. I don't know why. That pleases me so much. But it's in a beautiful serif font rather than the sans serif font that it uses.
Like time has been paused and everything is more elegant now.
I don't know what it is. I don't know what they're trying to say with it. Maybe it's a bug, but it's really nice. I don't know why I noticed it. I was like, I really like this and I can't express even to myself why. My entire internal parliament of voices is silent on why this is the case, but I really like it.
I like the use of parliament there.
Thank you.
That was...
It's also another Shakespeare allusion.
I thought it was Chaucerian, actually. We shouldn't be allowed to do podcasts.
No. Hello.
Hello.
I had to think about how to pronounce this. Hello, Quatever and Crotchet Bar. Quatever, he's asterisk and says...
Like a quaver.
Yes, indeed. Apologies for specifically targeting Chris with this sin word. It's a mashup of quaver and crate. And it doesn't work.
I think that's because he assumed that I'd be reading it.
Yes, yeah. Upon finishing Control a few weeks ago, 2 moments shave stuck out to me.
2 moments have.
Yes, that's
Not
right.
2 moment shave. I can do that from over here. I'm not even looking at the paper.
2 moments have stuck out to me. One is the Ashtrat Maze, featuring music by
Ashtray Maves.
Oh my god, what's happened to this email? Maybe it's my fault. I don't know why. The Ashtray Maze, featuring music by Old Gods of Asgard. Mm-hmm. And the other is Playing Through a Firefight as the credits music played, the latter fittingly scored by one of Porcupine Tree's best songs. After a digression of thought from Steve Wilson to XTC and a general rumination on the demise of licensed soundtracks from movies, I wondered if you could have any game scored by a band or musician you love, what would it be? Avoiding low-hanging flutes, like another game scored by 65 Days of Static, for example. How about a horror game scored by Colin Stetson of Gazelle Twin? A weird narrative experience, the strains of these new Puritans. Will Johnny Greenwood ever twin his love of orchestral scores and video games? Where's that Jeff Minter game scored by Trent Reznor? A 90s slacker version of Life is Strange scored by Stephen Malkmus? Death Grips Beat 'em Up? Janelle Monáe rhythm game. I'm just
close. I was actually going to suggest a Janelle Monáe game, but it's not a rhythm game.
He says, I'm just listing bands now. Who would be your go-to pairing of artist and genre? Thanks for all the pods. Luke, aka Dynamic Calories from the Discords.
I was going to say a fun thing about Control's use of music, licensed music, is I think Old Gods of Asgard is just another name of Poets of the Fall. Poets of the Fall were the band that did the closing song over Max Payne 2.
Oh, okay. Well, that figures.
So they keep showing up, and yeah, there is a cool, Enjoy Our Friends, like, mixtape kind of moment in Control. Control's a weird game. Let's talk about them all. In terms of my pairings, I was actually going to mention Janelle Monáe, but it wouldn't be a rhythm action game. I would go for a Devil May Cry style character action game to the music of Janelle Monáe. I think that would work real well, because she has a very strong visual identity and amazing music. I would also go for I would love a Disco Elysium style introspective RPG to the music of Mitski. I don't know if that will resonate in this room necessarily, but I would go for that 100%. Trying to think. What would you go for while I think?
I think, in terms of like something really, I mean, some of the music I like to listen to anyway is almost just wouldn't soundtrack games except in specific circumstances. So games rely on a certain amount of kind of dynamism, and you need music that can be reactive to that, which means music that can be layered and manipulated, and layers of those stripped out, which doesn't necessarily suit all kinds of composition, I don't think.
Right.
But I mean, obviously there are soundtrack moments in games where you can just drop a fully fledged track. I mean, the famous one is when you cross over to Mexico in Red Dead Redemption, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, suddenly Jose Gonzalez is here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But in terms of like an artistic vision that can come in a game, I'd love to hear the Demdike Stairs game. I think I wouldn't be able to play it. It would fill me with too great a sense of dread.
It feels like there are a lot of Decemberists adjacent games.
Are they?
Yeah. I was trying to think. So
you mean the sea shanty-esque era?
Sort of, yeah. Like, but no, I mean, it's sort of like a lot of games get made sort of gently in the West Coast, and they're sort of about being in a car.
Okay. Like, I have listened to a lot of Decemberists while being on car trips on the West Coast, so.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. This is sort of the stuff that is extant. There aren't a ton of games about getting divorced, and therefore could you truly say that the National has soundtracked a game?
Oh my god.
Like if you were to make the National the game, and I think it would basically be Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, except as you played, Navi, your little fairy friend, would get further and further and further and further away, and you'd hear her more and more and more and more distantly. until the very plaintive, like, hey, listen, was like absolutely fucking miles away, and you'd think about everything you'd lost.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, actually, I would totally love John Darnielle to work on a game.
Who's that?
Of the Mountain Goats.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's super game literate. Anyway, he wrote a great novel called Wolf in White Van, which, if you're looking for very good recent fiction about isolated men who lose themselves in a particular fantasy, that is a very good example of it, done sensitively and so on.
All right.
But yeah, I think, and Mountain Goats kind of contain the potential to be both very, very literate and also kind of play lots of different tones, from sort of lightly comedic to gothic to kind of weirdly epic sometimes. I always thought there was like, there's a game concealed in the track, in the Craters of the Moon off the album Heretic Pride, which there's totally something there. I would totally play that game, whatever it turned out to be. And I think of all the people that you mentioned, it's one of the people that you could imagine sitting down and figuring something out that was pretty cool as well. Yeah.
That's all the questions we have.
Cool. If you'd like to send us a question for a future episode of the podcast, you can do so by emailing us at questions@crateandcrowbar.com. You can also tweet us at Crate and Crowbar. Thanks as ever to our Patreon backers, whom make all of this possible. Take of that what you will.
What have you wrought?
Yeah, exactly. What have you done? The address to find out what you've done is patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. We also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/Crate and Crowbar, exclusively populated by episodes of a podcast you've already listened to. Incredible. What a fantastic opportunity to subscribe. If you would like to follow us as individuals, this is pointless in my case because I basically don't tweet. I'm at C Thurston. That's CTHURSTE.
And I'm Marsh Davis, MARSHDAVIES. I also don't really tweet, but I do spend an awful lot of time on Twitter being angry. I don't think you can...
Silently angry.
I don't think you could absorb that through following me.
If you want to absorb that vibe.
I really am very angry most of the time.
Wouldn't it be good if, there was some sort of synesthesia where you could be on someone's Twitter page and just sort of get like a hum that was how they were feeling.
Just a raw bellow.
I want to check in on screaming into a furnace. It's Marsh Davies.
That's me.
Ooh. Thanks for listening, everybody.